Welcome back to another story on Harryverse X. This time, we're bringing you, what if Aquaman and Poseidon claimed Harry as son and Atlantis trained him as god of ocean magic and storms. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Deep remembers the quarry had been Vernon Dursley's idea, which meant it had been thought through with the careful cruelty of a man who believed himself clever. It wasn't the first time Harry had been hurt. The cupboard under the stairs had taught him about darkness before he was 4, and hunger was so familiar it felt almost like a companion. He knew the particular ache of bruised ribs, knew how to breathe around it so it didn't show on his face, knew which floorboards creaked between his cupboard and the kitchen when he needed water in the night. He had learned, very early, that the best version of himself was the smallest one, quiet, invisible, forgettable. But the quarry was new. It was a flooded limestone pit about 40 minutes outside Little Whinging, hidden behind a rusted gate that Vernon had to break open with bolt cutters, which he'd bought specifically for today. The water was grey-green and still, and it smelled of old stone and rain. Dudley had refused to come, which was unusual. Dudley loved watching, but even he had drawn some line that his 7-year-old brain couldn't quite articulate and had stayed home with Petunia. Only Vernon had come. He'd made Harry carry the cage from the car boot. It was an old wire dog crate, the kind used for large breeds, and it had a padlock on the door that Vernon had tested 3 times before they left. Harry had carried it without asking questions because asking questions always made things worse. He'd learned that lesson at 4.5. "Get in," Vernon said, when they reached the water's edge. Harry looked at the cage. He looked at the water. He didn't say anything. He just looked at Vernon's face, that broad red expanse of satisfaction, and understood what this was about. 3 days ago, Harry had accidentally made the neighbor's prize roses bloom in winter. He hadn't meant to, he never meant to, but Vernon had seen the look on Mrs. Figg's face when she found them, that strange wonder, and he'd known whose fault it was. "I said get in." Harry got in. The padlock snapped shut. Vernon tested it twice, the same way he'd tested it at home, and Harry noticed distantly that his uncle's hands were shaking slightly, not with fear, with the particular excitement of a man who had decided that what he was doing was justified, was necessary, was the only reasonable response to what Harry was. He needed that certainty. Without it, he might have been a monster. Freaks shouldn't exist, Vernon said quietly, and there was something almost philosophical about it. They upset the natural order. Then he kicked the cage into the water. The cold hit Harry like a fist. The quarry was deep, much deeper than it looked from the surface, and the cage sank fast, tilted at an angle because of how it had fallen, one corner hitting a submerged shelf of limestone before continuing down. Harry grabbed the wire mesh and pressed himself to the highest corner as the water rose, but the cage was fully submerged within seconds and there was no highest corner anymore, just grey-green dark in every direction. He didn't panic, which surprised him. He thought he should panic. He watched the surface light shrinking above him as the cage continued to sink and he thought, quite clearly, "I don't want to die." But that was different from panic. Panic would have made him thrash, would have made him waste the breath he had. Instead he pressed his back to the wire and looked upward and felt something, some instinct that had no name, reach outward from somewhere behind his sternum. The water answered. He didn't know what that meant, exactly. He felt it the way you feel a sound before you hear it, a vibration in the bones before the ears catch up. The water pressed close against the cage mesh, and he had the sudden, vivid impression that it was listening, that every molecule of it was tilted toward him the way sunflowers tilt toward light. The cage hit the bottom. 30 feet down, limestone and silt, and absolute dark, and Harry was out of air. He opened his mouth because he couldn't not, and the water rushed in, and he thought, this is it, then. And then 2 things happened at the same time. The first was a hand, large, scarred, and impossibly strong, closing around the cage door and tearing it from its hinges the way you might tear a page from a book. The padlock didn't shatter or pick, it simply ceased to matter, the whole door ripped free with a shriek of metal that Harry felt in his teeth. The second was a warmth that spread outward from the water in his lungs, a warmth that had no right to exist 30 feet underwater in a grey-green English quarry, a warmth that tasted of open ocean and lightning in something so ancient Harry's brain couldn't hold it in any category he had. And then he was being pulled upward. He broke the surface coughing, or trying to cough. There was water in him that wasn't coming out the way water should, it was absorbing, dispersing, as though his body was simply reclaiming it, and someone was holding him against a chest that felt like warm rock, one arm around his ribs, treading water with an ease that spoke of someone for whom water was simply another floor to stand on. Harry blinked quarry water from his eyes and looked up. The man holding him was enormous. Not Vernon enormous, not the soft bulk of someone who ate too much and moved too little, but the kind of enormous that suggested every inch had been built by something. Dark hair, golden brown skin, a jaw that looked like it had been argued about by sculptors. He was wearing, and Harry's 7-year-old brain filed this as simply another strange fact in a day of strange facts, what appeared to be scale armor, green-black and iridescent, and he had tattoos that moved. The tattoos moved. Harry watched them shift across the man's forearms, currents, waves, something that might have been a trident, and filed that under strange facts as well. "Hey," the man said. His voice was deep and had a quality to it that reminded Harry of the rumble before thunder. "You okay?" Harry considered this. "I think so," he said, and coughed again. The water went in funny. "Yeah, it would. You were breathing it. That's not possible. Usually not." The man looked at him steadily. There was something in his face that Harry couldn't quite name, not pity, not the awful fascination that adults sometimes got when they looked at his scar, but something that sat closer to recognition. "You called to the sea. I heard you. I didn't mean to. They never do. First time." The man shifted him slightly, more secure. "I'm Arthur." Harry looked at the water around them, at the sheer grey walls of the quarry, at the rope still hanging over the edge where Vernon had lowered the cage. Vernon's car was gone, Harry noticed. He'd left. He'd simply left. Something about that should have hurt more than it did. "Harry," he said. Arthur nodded, like this confirmed something. "Harry." He said it the way you say a word you've been looking for. "All right, Harry. Before we get you out of this water, I need to tell you something's about to happen that's going to be." The water in the center of the quarry erupted. It didn't splash. It didn't surge. It rose, straight upward, in a column 20 feet high, and within that column something moved, a shape, a presence, a weight of consciousness so vast that Harry felt it against his skin like pressure change. The column collapsed back into the quarry, and where it had been, standing on the surface of the water as though the concept of sinking were simply beneath him, was a man. He was tall in the way that mountains are tall, not with measurement but with implication. White hair, loose around his shoulders. A beard trimmed short. Eyes that were the exact gray of open ocean in a storm, not stormy, not metaphorically stormy, but genuinely and specifically the color of the Atlantic in January when the swells run 8 meters and the sky loses its seam with the water. He was wearing robes that moved with currents that didn't exist, and he was carrying a trident that Harry felt in his back teeth. He looked at Arthur. Arthur looked at him. The silence had the quality of two very large, very stubborn objects making contact. "You got here fast," Arthur said finally. "I was already watching him," the man said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "I have been watching him for some time." Arthur's arm tightened fractionally around Harry. He called to the sea, "Poseidon." "That means he's mine," Poseidon said, and it wasn't a challenge, just a fact stated in the way that weather is stated. "Yes. That is correct. He is mine. He carries my bloodline, diluted, yes, far down the mortal branch, but it surfaces. It always surfaces in the ones that matter." He looked at Harry. "You breathed the water, boy." "It went in weird," Harry said. Something shifted in Poseidon's expression. It wasn't a smile, exactly. It was more like the first twitch of something that had forgotten how. It went in weird, he repeated, slowly, as though tasting the sentence. Yes. I suppose it would feel that way, the first time. I'm keeping him, Arthur said. Poseidon turned the full weight of those storm-gray eyes on the king of Atlantis, and the silence stretched until it was almost physical. He is of Olympian blood. He called to the sea. The sea answered. Atlantis trains its children, not Olympus. Atlantis did not exist when his bloodline was written. Poseidon stepped forward, not walking, the water simply rearranging itself beneath him, until he was 5 feet from Arthur, and Harry had the distinct impression he was sitting between two weather systems. I will take him to the mountain. The mountain will kill him. He's 7 years old and mostly mortal. Arthur's voice had gone very level. He needs proper training before he can survive the Olympian environment, and you know it. I am patient. You are not. A pause. Then, astonishingly, Poseidon's mouth curved. No, he agreed. I am not. Harry looked at Arthur. He looked at Poseidon. He looked at the quarry walls, at the place where Vernon's rope still hung. He thought about the cupboard. He thought about the roses blooming in winter, about the time he'd accidentally turned his teacher's tea cold because she'd been unkind to a smaller boy, about every strange thing he'd ever done that had ended in punishment. He thought about the water that had come into his lungs and stayed there like it belonged. I'll go with both of you, he said. Both men looked at him. It was a particular kind of looking, the kind that contained recalibration. I'll go with both, Harry repeated, because repetition was how he'd learned to hold ground. Or I'll sit here on the edge and wait for someone normal to come along. There's nothing normal within 40 miles, Poseidon said. Then I'll wait a long time. Another silence. This one felt different, lighter, somehow, as though something had released. Arthur laughed. It was a big, chest-deep, genuinely surprised sound, and it bounced off the quarry walls and came back twice. He's 7, he said to Poseidon, with something in his voice that sounded almost like delight. Yes, Poseidon said. He is. He looked at Harry again, and this time what was in his face was unmistakable. It was pride, the clean pure kind, entirely involuntary. Both, he said, slowly. That would be unprecedented. Most things worth doing are, Arthur said. The two of them looked at each other over Harry's head and came to some agreement that Harry wasn't entirely privy to, conducted in the way that powerful beings conduct their most important negotiations, not with words but with the quality of silence between them. Atlantis first, Poseidon said. For the foundation work. Then Olympian instruction, when he can hold the power without burning. Arthur nodded. And you'll visit. I will visit when I choose, Poseidon said, which was apparently his version of agreeing. Great, Arthur said. He looked down at Harry. You ever been underwater before? Properly underwater? I was underwater about 2 minutes ago. I mean willingly. Harry thought about it. I used to stick my face in the bathtub and see how long I could hold my breath. Got to 4 minutes once before Dudley sat on my head. Arthur's expression darkened briefly, something moved through his eyes that Harry would later recognize as the particular anger of a man encountering something that should not exist, but he kept his voice easy. 4 minutes is good. We're going to go a lot longer than that. And further down. He looked at the quarry surface. The sea's not far. 20 miles. We will not travel by road, Poseidon said, as though the concept was personally offensive. He reached out one hand, large, weathered, with rings on 3 fingers that caught light from nowhere, and laid it briefly on the surface of the quarry water. The water opened. Not drained, opened, the way a door opens, a vertical tunnel of perfect stillness appearing in the center of the quarry, water curving away from it like curtains drawn back, and at the bottom of the tunnel Harry could see the blue, genuine, deep ocean blue, nothing like the quarry's gray-green, of somewhere far away. A current gate, Arthur explained, watching Harry's face. "It'll feel weird for about 3 seconds. "Everything today has felt weird," Harry said, and let Arthur carry him toward it. They dropped into the tunnel, and the quarry disappeared, and the ocean arrived. The shock of it wasn't cold, it was presence. The Atlantic in May, 50 miles off the British coast, at a depth of 200 feet, was a different category of existence than the quarry had been. The quarry had been water. This was ocean, alive, enormous, talking in frequencies below hearing. Harry felt it against every surface of his skin simultaneously, and his magic, that wordless, always present thing behind his sternum, lit up like something switched on. He wasn't drowning. He noticed this. He was breathing, or something close enough to breathing that the distinction didn't seem urgent. Water moved through him in a rhythm that mimicked lungs, and his blood was warm. "First adaptation," Poseidon said, somewhere to his left, and Harry could hear him perfectly, sound carrying through water with a strange clarity. "The body remembers what the blood knows. It will be easier each time." Arthur was beside him, watching his face with the careful attention of someone monitoring for distress signals. "How do you feel?" Harry looked around at the Atlantic. A school of something silver, mackerel, he'd learn later, parted around him without alarm, flowing past his arms the way water flows around stone. 200 feet below, the seafloor was a landscape of ridges and valleys and shadows moving over sand. Above him, the surface was a silver ceiling with light moving across it. "Big," he said. "It feels very big." "It is very big," Arthur agreed. "Biggest thing there is." "Come," Poseidon said, and moved through the water the way thought moves, without visible effort, without displacement, simply arriving in a new position as though the water had agreed to relocate around him. "Atlantis is 400 miles from this position. We will not take 400 miles to get there." "How long will it take?" Harry asked. "Long enough," Poseidon said, "for you to understand that the sea is not a place you visit. It is a place you are." Harry thought about that for a moment. The mackerel swirled back around him, curious and quick, and one of them bumped his hand with its nose. He turned to look at it. It looked back at him with its small sideways eye, completely unafraid. "Okay," he said, to the fish, to the ocean, to the two impossible men on either side of him. "Okay." They moved. 400 miles of Atlantic took 11 minutes at the speed Poseidon set, and those 11 minutes were the most information Harry had ever been given in one sitting. Not explained to him, nothing was explained, but shown, in the way that the ocean shows, continental shelf dropping away into abyssal plain, hydrothermal vents breathing mineral dark water upward like chimneys, whale song that wasn't song but communication, the wreck of something ancient and wooden on a seamount at 3,000 feet, deep-sea creatures with their own cold light drifting through darkness. He saw all of it without time to categorize it, and it went into him the way the quarry water had gone in, differently, deeply, as though he'd been waiting to hold it. Arthur watched him take it all in and said nothing, which was the right thing to do. Poseidon, for his part, moved ahead of them and occasionally pointed at things, a canyon, a thermal column, a patch of bioluminescent plankton the size of a football pitch, with the manner of a man showing you something he is quietly proud of, though he would never say so. Then Atlantis appeared. Harry had no category for it. Later, when he was older and had read every surface world account of Atlantis ever written, he would understand that none of them had come close, not because they'd gotten the wrong details, but because they'd been looking for a city, and Atlantis wasn't exactly a city. It was a civilization expressed as architecture, a philosophy made physical, a world that had decided water was not an obstacle but a medium, and had built accordingly. It rose from the seafloor like something grown rather than constructed, spires of engineered coral and Atlantean alloy, bioluminescent panels that ran along every surface like skin, vast domed structures that breathed with internal currents. Bridges crossed between towers, not as physical paths but as maintained pressure differentials that pushed traffic from point to point. The scale was enormous, bigger than London, Harry would later estimate, though that comparison would never feel adequate, and it moved. Not unstably, not trembling, but alive, adjusting, the whole structure in constant minor dialogue with the ocean around it. At the center, highest and brightest, a palace that was not a palace but a nexus, the place where Atlantean design had given up on the idea of separating inside from outside and simply accepted the ocean as architecture. Harry stared at it for a long time. "Home," Arthur said, beside him. There was something in the word, a quiet weight, complicated, real. "For now," Poseidon said. "And perhaps for longer." They descended toward the great main gate, which recognized Arthur in a way that went beyond biometrics, the whole gate structure shifting as they approached, pressure differentials aligning, and as they passed through it Harry felt something settle around his shoulders like a garment. Not physical. Not magical in any way he recognized. Just a sense of arrival, deep and certain, the feeling of something that has been waiting finally receiving what it waited for. Guards stationed at the gate saw Arthur first and snapped to attention, then saw the boy in his arms and then saw the figure behind them, and the attention became something different, more complex, involving more of the body than just the spine. "My king," the senior guard said, eyes moving from Arthur to Harry to Poseidon and back with commendable professionalism. "We were not informed of." "No," Arthur said. "You weren't. Is the queen in the throne room?" "The receiving hall, sir." "Tell her I'm coming." "Tell her," Arthur paused, looked at Harry, and seemed to make a decision. "Tell her I found someone." They moved through Atlantis. People stopped. People stared. Word moved faster than they did, it always does, in cities, and by the time they reached the receiving hall a small crowd had gathered in the corridors, Atlantean citizens who had the particular look of people trying to appear as though they had simply happened to be standing in that exact location. Harry noticed them noticing him and held their gaze when they met his eyes. Some looked away. Some didn't. The receiving hall was enormous and lit with blue-white bioluminescence from panels in every wall, and at the far end of it, standing rather than sitting, was a woman. She was tall, red-haired, wearing armor that was clearly functional rather than ceremonial, and she had the bearing of someone who had decided at some early age that she would be underestimated by the world and had simply chosen to find this funny rather than annoying. Her eyes moved from Arthur to Harry in about half a second, and in the next half second she had crossed half the room. She stopped 3 feet away and looked at Harry with green eyes that were sharp and warm in the same breath. "Arthur," she said, not looking at Arthur. "Who is this?" "Harry," Arthur said. "Harry, this is Mara. My wife. Queen of Atlantis." Mara crouched, not to be condescending, just to be eye level, and looked at Harry with the frank assessment of someone who has very little patience for pretense. "Harry," she said. "How old are you?" "7, Harry said. "Almost 8. Are you hurt?" Harry considered this with the careful honesty of someone who had learned that "I'm fine" was a sentence adults use to close conversations. "Some bruises. The water went in my lungs funny, but it came out, or went somewhere. I don't know." Mara looked at Arthur over Harry's head. Something passed between them that involved no words and several emotions. "He was in a cage," Arthur said. "In a quarry. Someone," his jaw tightened. "Someone locked him in a cage and dropped him in 30 feet of water." Mara's expression didn't change on the surface. But her eyes did something that Harry would, later in life, describe as going very still, the way water goes still just before it freezes. "I see," she said, very calmly. "And this someone, where are they now?" "Gone," Harry said. "He drove away. He does that. Does things and then," he stopped. "He drove away." Another look between Mara and Arthur. This one was quicker and more decisive. "And the god?" Mara asked, without turning. "Behind you," Poseidon said. Mara stood and turned and regarded the god of the sea with the precise lack of reverence that made her, Arthur had once told the Justice League, the bravest person he knew. "Lord Poseidon," she said, inclining her head just far enough to be acknowledgement, not far enough to be deference. Poseidon's mouth did the thing again, the near smile. "You have not changed," he said. Neither have you, Mara said, which is both the advantage and the limitation of divinity. She looked at Arthur. He's staying. Yes, Arthur said. Both of you claimed him. Both of us, Poseidon confirmed. Mara nodded, once, the way generals nod when they've received tactical information that confirms what they already suspected. She looked at Harry again, and her expression shifted, warmer, more personal, less strategic. Are you hungry? Harry blinked. Of all the possible next sentences, this had not been in his forecast. Yes, he said. Very good. She held out her hand, and Harry took it, because it was offered the right way, not grabbed at, not demanded, and she walked him toward a side passage off the receiving hall. Atlantean food is going to seem strange at first. Some of it doesn't look like food. Don't let that stop you. What does it look like? Harry asked. Sometimes it glows. Don't panic. That's normal. Does it taste good? Some of it. The blue things, don't eat the blue things until you've been here at least a month. Your stomach isn't ready. Why? Because they're technically still alive when you eat them, and the argument about whether that matters is one that the Atlantean philosophical establishment has been having for 600 years without resolution. She glanced down at him. We'll start you on the regular things and work up. Behind them, Harry heard Arthur say to Poseidon, in a low voice, the surface people, the ones who had him. I am aware of them, Poseidon said. What are you going to do? A long pause. Nothing permanent, Poseidon said, with a weight on the word permanent that implied the question had several possible answers and he was selecting the one that required the most restraint. Poseidon. I said permanent, Aquaman. The fat one will find, over the next several years, that every plumbing fixture in his home becomes inexplicably hostile. The woman will find that her roses, all her roses, and her neighbor's roses, bloom exclusively in colors she finds repellent. And the boy, Dudley, was it? Dudley will discover that water, in all its forms, carries an attitude toward him. Another pause. For several years. Arthur was quiet for a moment. That's actually pretty restrained. I thought so, Poseidon agreed, and for the first time in what felt like centuries, something in his voice sounded very close to satisfied. In the passage ahead, Mara was telling Harry about the 97 known species of fish that lived within Atlantis's internal water systems, and Harry was listening with the full attention of someone who has discovered, at the age of 7, that the universe is considerably larger and stranger and more interested in him than he'd been allowed to believe. He stopped walking for a moment and looked back. Arthur was watching him from the receiving hall entrance, and the expression on his face was the one Harry would carry with him for the rest of his life, not the expression of a king, not the expression of a man with power or history or a complicated relationship with his own legacy, but the simple, unguarded expression of someone who has found something they didn't know they'd been looking for. Harry held it for a second. Then he turned back to Mara and asked about the glowing food, and Atlantis closed around him like water around a stone, not trapping, not drowning, but holding. As it turned out, some of it tasted very good. The blue things, he decided the next morning, having ignored Mara's advice because he was 7 and the blue things were extremely blue, did not taste good. They tasted like the sea floor smelled and they moved in a way that confirmed the philosophical debate was probably valid. But even that, lying on a bed made of material that wasn't quite fabric and wasn't quite coral, in a room that breathed with gentle internal currents, with his stomach conducting its own philosophical debate about the blue things, felt more like home than the cupboard under the stairs had ever felt. The deep had remembered him. He was beginning to remember it back. Chapter 2, Lessons in the Abyss. The first thing Mara ever taught Harry was how to fall. Not literally, he was in the ocean, falling wasn't the danger. But on his 3rd day in Atlantis, she took him to a training chamber carved into the bedrock beneath the palace, a vast spherical space filled with water at shifting pressures, and she stood across from him with her arms crossed and said, "The first thing you need to learn is how to be hit and not lose yourself." Harry looked at her. "You're going to hit me? Something is going to hit you." I haven't decided if it'll be me yet. She gestured at the chamber walls. Water can be the softest thing in the world or the hardest. The difference is speed and intention. I'm going to send things at you and you're going to learn that the instinct to flinch is the thing that gets you killed. I don't flinch, Harry said. Mara looked at him steadily for a moment. There was something in her face, not quite sympathy, not quite assessment, that said she'd heard those words from 7-year-olds before and knew exactly what they cost. No, she said, quietly. I don't suppose you do. Then her expression shifted back to businesslike. Good. That's one thing I don't have to teach you. Now, the second thing. She raised one hand and the water in the chamber moved, not flowed, but organized itself, a sphere of compressed current the size of a cannonball forming and holding between her palm and the far wall. This, she said, is hydrokinesis. You have it. I can feel it from here, it's in everything you do in the water, the way the currents follow you without being asked. You've been doing it unconsciously since you got here. Every fish in the residential quarter follows you around like you're throwing a party. She released the sphere and it dispersed. We're going to make it conscious. Harry looked at his hands. He'd noticed the fish, it had been hard not to, given that he'd woken up on his second morning with 3 eels coiled companionably around his pillow, but he hadn't connected it to himself. He'd assumed eels were just friendly. Close your eyes, Mara said. He closed them. Tell me what you feel. Harry stood in the training chamber and felt the water pressing evenly on every surface of his skin, felt the slight temperature differential where the pressure jets in the walls cycled, felt, faintly, like a whisper, the movement of 24 Atlanteans in the corridors outside, their bodies displacing water the way rocks displace current in a river. People, he said. I can feel where people are. How many? He counted the displacement signatures. 23. No, 24, there's a small one at the end of the corridor. A pause. Running. Small person running. That's a child from the residential wing. She runs the same route every morning. Open your eyes. Harry opened them. Mara was watching him with an expression that she was working to keep neutral and not entirely succeeding. That took most of my students 6 weeks, she said. I've been in the water my whole life, Harry said. In the bath. In puddles. I always felt, he shrugged. I thought everyone felt the water talking. No, Mara said. Not everyone. She moved to the center of the chamber and faced him. Now. I want you to push the water between us. Not a current, a wall. A solid column of pressure from floor to ceiling. Harry looked at the space between them. He thought about what it had felt like when the quarry water had listened to him, that reaching sensation from behind his sternum. He found it again, it was easier to find than he expected, like finding a muscle he'd been using without knowing its name, and he pushed. The column formed. Not cleanly, it shuddered, it was thicker at the bottom than the top, it had the texture of something improvised, but it was solid enough that when Mara pressed her palm against it, it held. She pushed harder. It held. She pressed both hands against it and leaned her full weight forward and the column compressed slightly but maintained. She looked at Harry over the top of it. 2 days, she said. Harry let the column dissolve. Is that good? Good isn't the word I'd use. She straightened, looked at the chamber walls, then back at him. Do you know what the Atlantean Academy's most advanced students can do at the end of their first year of training? No. They can hold a column like that for about 4 seconds before it destabilizes. She paused. You held that for 1.5 minutes. While we were talking. Harry considered this. Oh, he said. Yes, Mara said. Oh. She moved toward the chamber wall and turned back to face him, and he recognized this distance, it was the distance of someone about to demonstrate something for real. Again. But this time I'm pushing back. The next 3 hours were the most physically exhausting of Harry's life, and he had lived a physically difficult life. Mara was not cruel about it, she never was, in training, but she was absolutely honest, which meant that when he got it wrong, she told him precisely why and then made him do it again until the why was corrected. She pushed water at him in columns, in spirals, in pressurized bursts that hit like a solid object, and Harry responded first with instinct and then, gradually, with something that was beginning to look like technique. By the end of the third hour he was keeping a rotating shield of redirected pressure around himself that sent her attacks spinning wide, and he was doing it without closing his eyes. When Mara finally called a stop she was, Harry noticed, breathing harder than she had been at the start. She looked at him with an expression that was half satisfaction and half the particular consideration of someone adjusting their lesson plan significantly upward. "Tomorrow," she said, "we do this for 4 hours. And we add current manipulation. Can we do it for 5? Harry asked. Mara stopped. Then she looked at him with something that she absolutely, definitely did not call fondness and said, 6, if you eat the proper breakfast. Not the blue things. I've learned my lesson about the blue things, Harry said. You say that, but the philosophical debate they've started in your digestive system is probably still ongoing. He laughed, a genuine, unguarded laugh, and the sound of it bounced around the chamber and Mara turned away quickly and began doing something with a pressure gauge on the wall that didn't need doing. The month settled into a rhythm. Training with Mara in the mornings, hydrokinesis, combat applications, pressure manipulation, current reading. Afternoons with Master Aldrich, the head of the Atlantean Academy's theory division, a scholar so old his skin had taken on the translucence of deep-water fish, who taught Harry the mechanics of Atlantean science magic, how their technology interfaced with the ocean's natural systems, how the engineered coral of Atlantis's structure stored and processed energy, how the pressure differentials that ran the city were essentially a conversation between architecture and thermodynamics. Aldrich was the first person to notice that Harry's magic was doing something unexpected. It happened 3 months in, during a session on Atlantean sigil scribing, the method by which Atlanteans encoded instructions into their technology, a kind of programming language expressed in bioluminescent geometry. Harry had been practicing a basic navigation sigil, the kind that first-year academy students spent 4 weeks learning, and he'd gotten it right on his first attempt. This was unusual but not unprecedented. What was unprecedented was what happened next. The sigil, once activated, was supposed to generate a simple current pointer, an arrow of directed flow indicating magnetic north. What Harry's generated was a 3-dimensional map of the surrounding ocean floor to a radius of 6 miles, rendered in moving water with topographic accuracy, hovering at chest height and rotating slowly. Aldrich stared at it for a very long time. "My boy," he said, finally. "Is it wrong?" Harry asked. "It is not wrong." Aldrich walked around the map, peering at the detail. "It is considerably more than the sigil requested. The sigil requested north. You gave it a question, and it answered more fully than the question intended." He looked at Harry over the top of the map. "Where did you learn to add the depth parameter?" "I didn't," Harry said. When I drew the sigil I was thinking about wanting to know where things were, not just which direction. It seemed wrong to only know direction. What if there's something between you and north?" Aldrich was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That is an observation that took the Atlantean Academy 3 centuries to formalize into theory." He sat down, carefully, he was very old, and folded his hands on the desk. "Harry. I want you to draw every sigil you've learned so far. All of them. Exactly as you understand them." Harry drew them. All 14 that he'd learned in 3 months of afternoon sessions, each rendered with whatever internal understanding accompanied them, and one by one they did what sigils do except more, or differently, or with additional dimensions that the original designers had not included because it had not occurred to them to ask. Aldrich documented every variation. Afterward, he went directly to Arthur and said, with the precise understatement of someone who has spent a very long time around extraordinary things, "The boy is doing something interesting with the academy curriculum." Arthur read the documentation. Then he went to find Harry, who was in the eastern residential corridor being followed by 17 fish and a small octopus. "Your afternoon sessions," Arthur said, walking alongside him, watching the octopus explore Harry's left shoulder with professional interest. "Aldrich says you're modifying the sigils." "Not on purpose," Harry said. "They just come out bigger." "Everything about you comes out bigger," Arthur said, with a tone that was neither complaint nor concern but something genuinely thoughtful. "Even the fish." He watched the octopus transfer to Harry's right shoulder. "His name is Ink, by the way. He lives in the administrative wing. He's been missing for 3 days. He found me yesterday," Harry said. "I think he likes my hair." Arthur watched Ink root around in Harry's hair with small, expressive arms, apparently in full agreement with this assessment. "I need to tell you something about your magic," Arthur said. "What Aldrich is documenting, the modifications, the expansions. We've seen students who are naturally talented, who learn faster and deeper than average. But what you're doing is different. You're not learning our magic, you're translating it. You're taking Atlantean sigil work and expressing it in terms of something else, something that was already in you." Harry thought about this. "The warm thing," he said. "When I draw the sigils, there's a warm thing that comes in from the side. Like something else is adding to it." Arthur nodded slowly. "That's Poseidon's blood. The Olympian aspect. It's trying to interface with the Atlantean training, and what you're getting is," he paused. "Honestly, we don't know yet what you're getting. Nobody has ever had both." "Is that a problem?" Harry asked. "That," Arthur said, "is the most interesting thing in this ocean." He stopped walking and looked at Harry, 7 years old, getting on for 8, small still but with the water's muscle beginning to develop in his shoulders and back, ink on his head and 17 fish orbiting him like a small solar system. "When Poseidon visits next month, we'll start the storm work. Aldrich wants you in an extra session per week on sigil theory first." "Can I add the fish sessions?" Harry asked. Arthur blinked. "The what?" "I've been talking to the fish," Harry said, in the tone of someone sharing something they're slightly embarrassed about finding interesting. "Not like, they don't talk back in words. But they understand things. Direction. Danger. Mood. I've been trying to formalize it. I think it might be a sigil application, if the sigil is oriented toward biological current reading instead of, show me," Arthur said. Harry turned to the 17 fish, focused, and sent a direction through the water, not words, not sound, just a current shift that meant something, gather. The fish assembled into a tight, organized formation, hovering in a perfect sphere around Harry at arm's length, rotating slowly. Arthur looked at the fish sphere. He looked at Harry. He looked at the fish sphere again. "Aldrich," he said, mostly to himself, "is going to be absolutely insufferable when he sees this." Poseidon's first visit happened on a night in October when Harry was 7 3/4, and it arrived, like Poseidon himself, with no warning and considerable theater. Harry was in his room attempting to sleep, which was a negotiation he had with his body every night because his body was 8 and still needed rest, and his brain was currently processing approximately 900 new things and felt that sleep was an inefficient use of time. He was lying on his back watching the bioluminescent panel on his ceiling cycle through its slow color change when the pressure in the room shifted. It was subtle. The kind of shift that a trained Atlantean would notice and an untrained one wouldn't. Harry noticed it because he was attuned to the water around him the way other people are attuned to sound. It was sense data, rich and constant, and this shift had a particular quality that he'd only felt once before, in a gray-green quarry, just before a column of water rose straight up. He sat up. "Lord Poseidon," he said, to the empty room. "Closer than you think," said Poseidon, and he stepped out of the wall. Not through it, the wall hadn't moved. He simply appeared from the space where wall met water column, as though the border between solid and liquid were a door that only he had a key to, and stood in Harry's room with his white hair loose and his storm-gray eyes doing that thing where they looked like weather rather than anatomy. Harry looked at him without flinching. He'd decided, somewhere in the 3 months since the quarry, that he was not going to flinch at Poseidon. This was partially stubbornness and partially because Poseidon's visits, even the unannounced one, always preceded something interesting. "You have been busy," Poseidon said. He crossed the room and sat, on the floor, which Harry found somehow fascinating, that a god would just sit on the floor, and looked up at Harry on the bed. "Mara's assessments reach me through channels she doesn't know about. Aldrich sends me sigil documentation with editorial notes that are 90% incredulity." "I'm not trying to show off," Harry said, because it felt important to clarify. "I know you aren't," Poseidon said. "Showing off requires an audience you're trying to impress. You are trying to understand. Those are different activities." He was quiet for a moment, watching Harry. "The magic you are doing with the Atlantean sigil work. Do you feel where it comes from?" Harry lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling. "There's the water part," he said, "which I think is the Atlantean training. And then there's the warm part that comes from, further away. Further in. Like it's behind the water part." "Behind," Poseidon said, quietly. "Yes. Exactly. The water aspect is the foundation, it is what connects you to the sea, to Atlantis, to every creature in the ocean. That is very old and very much yours." He paused. "What is behind it is older still. It is the storm aspect. It is lightning finding water. It is the moment where ocean becomes weather." Another pause. "That is what I am going to teach you. And it will be, uncomfortable, the first time. The first several times." "Because of the power?" Harry asked. "Because calling the storm is not like moving water," Poseidon said. "Moving water is collaboration, you and the ocean, together, choosing. Calling the storm is more like," he looked for the right word. "Insisting. The storm does not want to come. It is wild. It has to be convinced that you are wilder." Harry considered this. "How do I convince it?" Poseidon's expression did the near-smile thing. "You already know," he said. "You have been convincing things that you are wilder than them your entire life. You simply have not been doing it to weather." Harry thought about Vernon and the quarry and the cage and the water that had listened when he called. "Yeah," he said. "All right. Not tonight," Poseidon said. "Tonight I came for a different reason." He reached into the folds of his robe and produced something, a small disk of what appeared to be compressed seawater, somehow solid, about the size of a coin but thicker. It threw light in every direction the way water surfaces throw light, fractured, dancing, blue-white. "This is a focus. It belonged to your grandmother's grandmother's grandmother, which is as far back as I can trace without getting into genealogical waters I would rather not navigate with a 7-year-old. He held it out. Harry took it. The warmth was immediate and specific, not general warmth but the particular warmth of recognition, the way you feel when you walk into a room and hear a song you haven't heard since you were very young. His magic reached toward it automatically. "Keep it with you," Poseidon said. "It will help anchor the Olympian aspect until your training is advanced enough that you don't need anchoring." Harry turned the disc over in his fingers. The light shifted. In the blue-white fractures he could see, or thought he could see, something moving. Currents. Or clouds. Or both. "What happens if I lose it?" he asked. "You won't lose it," Poseidon said. "How do you know?" "Because the sea does not lose its children," Poseidon said, and stood from the floor in one clean movement, and stepped back toward the wall. "Sleep. Tomorrow Mara has planned something that she described to Aldrich as a reasonable escalation, and that Aldrich described to me as reckless. I would rest while you can." He stepped into the wall and was gone, leaving only the faint pressure signature of his passing and the smell of open ocean in a sealed room. Harry lay back and closed his hand around the disc and felt his magic settle into it the way water settles into a vessel, calm and filling and complete. He slept better than he had since before the cupboard. Mera's reasonable escalation turned out to be a live combat exercise in a training chamber with three of Atlantis's youngest military track soldiers, 18 and 19 years old, who had each been training for 4 years and who had been told simply that they were testing a new assessment methodology and not that the assessment methodology was an 8-year-old. Harry walked into the chamber and the three soldiers looked at each other. The one on the left, broad, with the relaxed stance of someone confident in physical contests, said, "The kid? Is there a problem?" Harry asked. No disrespect, but, he looked at Mera. "Begin when ready," Mera said, from the observation platform above. The three soldiers looked at each other again. The one on the right, faster, Harry noted, lighter on her feet, her hydrokinesis already cycling in a warm-up form, shrugged and raised her hands. Harry had been watching them for 30 seconds. He knew the broad one would come first and straight, confidence made people direct. He knew the fast one would flank immediately, using the broad one as cover for a pressure flanking strike. The third one, who hadn't moved yet and was watching Harry with more attention than the other two, was the dangerous one. The broad one came forward. His water strike was genuinely impressive, a compressed column moving at speed, and Harry sidestepped it completely and redirected the energy sideways without absorbing any of it, which sent it carving into the chamber wall where it left a gouge in the pressure stone. The fast one flanked exactly as predicted and Harry was already turning, catching the flanking strike on a rotating shield and spiraling it upward and outward, and when it dispersed at the chamber ceiling it came down as a pressure rain that hit the broad one from above and drove him to his knees. The third soldier, the careful one, launched his strike while Harry was handling the other two, and it was a good strike, layered, a compression column with a twist that was designed to punch through shields by attacking the structural weak points. Harry felt it coming, felt it in the water pressure as displacement before it arrived, and he did something he hadn't done in training yet, something that came from the warm behind the water part, from the disc in his pocket and the instruction from 2 nights ago. He called the storm. Tiny. Controlled. The size of the space between his hand and the incoming strike. A microcell of electrical charge building in the compressed water of the soldier's attack, and when the compression hit the charge it discharged outward, not harmfully, not at this scale, but with enough concussive force to dissolve the attack completely and send the third soldier stumbling backward 3 steps. The chamber went very quiet. Harry stood in the middle, 3 soldiers around him in varying states of non-victory, and he was breathing normally because he hadn't exerted himself enough to breathe otherwise. From the observation platform, Mera said, "The storm work." "Who taught you the storm work?" "Poseidon came by 2 nights ago," Harry said. Silence from the platform. "Then, he couldn't have mentioned that to me. He said you'd planned a reasonable escalation." "He is an insufferable," Mera stopped. Harry heard her take a measured breath. "Fine. Again. This time all 3 at once and no storm work. Water only." The broad soldier had gotten back to his feet. He was looking at Harry with an expression that had entirely shed its earlier dismissiveness and replaced it with something more honest, something that looked a lot like the beginning of respect. "You want to try something?" Harry asked him. The soldier, his name, Harry would learn, was Kale, glanced up at the observation platform, then back at Harry. "The redirect," he said. "When you turn my strike into the ceiling. Can you teach me that?" Harry thought about it. "Yeah," he said. "The angle of entry matters. If you catch it wrong it just breaks the redirect. You have to." He moved to demonstrate and Kale moved with him, and the fast one, Sarah, Harry learned, came over too, and within 10 minutes the training session had organically converted into something collaborative, 3 18-year-old soldiers taking technique notes from an 8-year-old who was explaining combat hydrokinesis with the focused clarity of someone who had never learned to explain things badly. Mera watched from the platform for a long time without interrupting. When the session ended she walked Harry back to the corridor, and they were halfway to the residential wing before she said, "You know you just did something that takes trained academy graduates a year to learn." "The redirect?" "The storm call." Her voice was even. "The storm work is Poseidon's domain, it isn't Atlantean training, it's Olympian, and even among the Olympian trained it's advanced work. You've been in Atlantis 4 months. Harry was quiet for a moment. Is that bad? He asked, and the question was genuinely open. He had no investment in the answer, no anxiety about it, just curiosity about the facts. Mara looked at him for a long moment. It's going to make your life complicated, she said. People don't know what to do with things they don't have categories for. You're going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. She paused. But no. It's not bad. And then, quietly, so quietly it was almost not meant to be heard, it's extraordinary. Harry heard it. He didn't say anything. He just kept walking and the fish materialized from side corridors to orbit him again, and ink dropped from a ceiling fixture onto his shoulder, and Mara pretended not to notice any of it. 2 years passed in the way that the best years do, too fast when you look back, richly full when you're in them. Harry turned 9 in the company of Arthur, Mara, Aldrich, Cale, Sarah, the third soldier whose name was Davin, approximately 40 Atlantean Academy students who had discovered that Harry gave better practical tutorials than most of their teachers, and Poseidon, who appeared at the birthday gathering with no warning and sat in the back against the wall and said absolutely nothing but stayed for 2 hours and ate the food they put in front of him without complaint. Arthur watched Poseidon eat birthday food made by Atlantean kitchen staff and experience a private joy that he kept entirely to himself. Harry turned 10 in a storm. Poseidon had decided that 10 was old enough for the next level of storm work, exterior application, real weather, not controlled chamber exercises, and he had taken Harry to the surface for the first time since the quarry. They had surfaced in the North Atlantic in February, and the storm that was already running hadn't been one Poseidon had called. It was a real system, 12-foot swells and 40-knot wind and horizontal rain. Harry stood on the surface of the ocean in the middle of it and didn't hold on to anything. The swell lifted him 20 feet and dropped him and lifted him again, and the wind hit him sideways, and the rain was cold enough to be structural, and he stood in all of it and felt, for the first time in 3 years of training, genuinely small. Poseidon stood beside him, completely unaffected, the storm moving around him the way rivers move around a boulder. He watched Harry find his footing on the swells, watched him adjust and readjust, and said nothing. Harry focused. He found the storm's energy the way he'd learned in the chamber exercises, not by reaching for it but by making himself available, becoming a conductor rather than a driver. He felt the storm's electrical charge, its pressure differentials, the enormous rotating energy of the system. He felt where it wanted to go. Then he said, very quietly but with complete certainty, not that way. And redirected the leading edge of the storm system 15 degrees north. The storm took 11 seconds to respond, weather was not fast, weather was vast, and when it did it was subtle, a shift in the prevailing current that bent the system's track away from what had been a bearing on a shipping lane. But it responded. Harry stood on 12-foot swells in February in the North Atlantic and he had just moved a storm. Poseidon looked at the shifted system. He looked at Harry. Who taught you to redirect instead of resist? He asked. Mara, Harry said. Current redirection. Same principle, bigger application. Poseidon was quiet for a moment. When you have your formal training session next week, he said, tell Mara I said, tell her she's done well. He paused. Don't tell her I said it exactly like that. She'll be intolerable. What should I tell her you said? Tell her, another pause, longer, while Poseidon appeared to have a small internal argument. Tell her adequate. Tell her she's done adequately. She'll know that means something better than adequate if you're saying adequate. Yes, Poseidon said. She will. And there was something in his voice that, if you'd told him it was fondness, he would have argued with the terminology while not disputing the essential accuracy of the description. Harry turned 11 on a Thursday in July and woke up to a letter. He'd almost forgotten. That was the strangest part, he had so thoroughly become what Atlantis and Poseidon and Arthur and Mara had been building that the surface world had become abstract, a place he knew about the way you know about history. Voldemort, the wizarding world, the boy who lived, these were things that had happened to a version of him that was very young and very distant. The letter arrived via a truly disoriented owl that had clearly been doing extraordinary things to find him. It had tracked him through 200 miles of Atlantic, descended through Atlantis's pressure boundary via what the gate security logs would later describe as a bird, inexplicably, and deposited a damp but intact envelope on Harry's breakfast table with the offended dignity of an owl that had been through an ordeal and expected acknowledgement. Harry looked at the envelope. The writing was green ink on yellowish parchment, and it read, Mr. H. Potter 3rd Residence, East Corridor, Level 7 Atlantis. He picked it up and turned it over. The seal was red wax impressed with a crest, a lion, a snake, a badger, an eagle. He opened it and read it. Then he sat back and looked at the owl, which was drying itself with reproachful dignity on his windowsill. Arthur, he called. Arthur appeared in the doorway 40 seconds later with a mug of Atlantean coffee substitute and the expression of someone who had not quite finished being asleep. He saw the letter. He saw Harry's face. He came fully awake. What is it? Harry handed him the letter. Arthur read it. Then he sat down across from Harry and put his coffee substitute on the table and read it again. Hogwarts, he said. Hogwarts, Harry confirmed. Your mother's world, Arthur said. The British Magical School. He put the letter down. This is the 4th one, by the way. The wards on Atlantis have been intercepting them. They've been coming more frequently. 4th. Harry raised his eyebrows. They started before my birthday. They started on your birthday. One a day for 3 days, then this one managed to actually get through. Arthur picked up his coffee substitute again and regarded it. There's a conversation we probably should have had before this morning. About Hogwarts, Harry said. About all of it. Your history on the surface. What happened, before the quarry? He looked at Harry directly, which Arthur always did when the topic was difficult. He never looked away from things that mattered. Your parents. What was done to Voldemort? What the wizarding world thinks happened and what actually happened. Harry had known the outline for years. Aldrich had given him wizarding history access in his 2nd year, once it was clear Harry's education was going to intersect with the surface world eventually. He knew about Lily and James Potter, about the killing curse and the protection it had met, about the scar on his forehead and the fragment of soul he'd been told lived behind it. He'd asked Poseidon about the soul fragment. Once. Poseidon's response had been 7 words, when you are ready, we will remove it. Harry had filed that under things to return to and continued studying current manipulation. I know the history, Harry said. What I don't know is, he picked up the letter again. What I want to do with it. Arthur watched him. I could not go, Harry said. Stay here, keep training, complete the Atlantean curriculum. Do the Olympian work with Poseidon. He turned the letter. Or I could go and see what they made of me. See what they built out of the boy who lived. A pause. See if any of it's real. My parents, their world. Whether there's anything in it that's actually mine. There's no version of this conversation, Arthur said quietly, where I tell you what to choose. I know. I'm not asking you to. Harry looked at him. I'm telling you what I'm thinking because you're my father and that's what you do with fathers. Arthur was still for a moment. Then something moved through his face, not dramatic, not showy, but genuine and deep, the expression of a man who has been given something he didn't know how much he needed. You're going to go, Arthur said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, Harry said. But on my terms. Not as the boy who lived. Not as the orphan they've been waiting to fit into their story. He set the letter down. As what I am. Arthur nodded slowly. I'll need to tell Poseidon. He already knows, Harry said. He probably knew when the first letter arrived. He probably knew when the owl set out. He looked at the owl, who had dried itself and was now examining ink with professional curiosity. He'll have opinions. He always has opinions. He'll want to come. He always wants to come to things. Arthur smiled, slowly, and it was the big chest-deep smile that had bounced off quarry walls 4 years ago. Let him. It'll be good for Hogwarts to have some perspective. Harry laughed. Outside his window, the Atlantic moved in deep slow currents, reading the temperature of the water 30 miles above and the weather 3 days ahead, and somewhere in the palace Mara was already in the training chamber and the fish were gathering in the corridor because they knew Harry's schedule better than Harry did, and Ink was investigating the owl with 4 arms simultaneously, and the letter from Hogwarts lay on the breakfast table with its red wax seal and its yellow parchment. Harry looked at it for a moment more. Then he pushed it aside, picked up his food, and decided that he had 1 more year before September and he was going to use every minute of it. Chapter 3, The Letter Finds the Sea. The second year of being 11 was, Harry decided, significantly more productive than the first 11 years combined. He threw himself into the remaining months before September with the focused intensity of someone who had decided they were going to walk into a new world on their own terms and wanted every possible advantage locked down before they stepped through the door. Mara doubled the training sessions without being asked. She'd seen the look on his face after the Hogwarts letter arrived and recognized it immediately, because it was the same look she got before a significant engagement. Arthur cleared his schedule 3 mornings a week to spar with Harry personally, which was a different category of training entirely because Arthur fought with the combination of Atlantean technique and surface world combat instinct that made him genuinely unpredictable. And Poseidon came more often. He didn't announce the change in frequency. He simply appeared more, twice a week instead of monthly, sometimes 3 times, occasionally 2 days in a row, as though he had reasons that prevented him from coming and then suddenly those reasons were less pressing. Harry didn't comment on it. He just had food ready, because he'd noticed that Poseidon always looked slightly at the Atlantean kitchen offerings the way someone looks at something they want but won't ask for. The storm work accelerated dramatically. In a deep ocean trench 3 miles below the surface, with no shipping lanes for 40 miles and Arthur monitoring from a submersible above, Poseidon and Harry ran exercises that Poseidon called thalassomancy, the intersection of water magic and storm calling, the point where Atlantean hydrokinesis and Olympian weather power stopped being separate systems and became a single unified language. The surface wizards, Poseidon said one afternoon, standing on the trench floor with the pressure of 3 miles of ocean above them and apparently finding it comfortable, use wands. Small pieces of wood with cores of magical substance. They channel their power through an external object. I know, Harry said. He was holding a current, a significant one, a redirected deep ocean thermal that he'd been maintaining for 20 minutes, without visible effort, mostly because Poseidon had started giving him things to hold during conversations because holding things during conversations was harder than holding them when focused. Aldrich covered the physics of wand magic in second year. It's inefficient. The wand imposes a translation layer between the caster and the magic. Inefficient, Poseidon agreed. Also limiting. The channel constrains what passes through it. He watched the current Harry was maintaining. When you go to Hogwarts, they will give you a wand. I know. You should get one. Harry looked at him. Really? Yes. For 2 reasons. Poseidon sat on the trench floor, on a shelf of basalt that he'd apparently decided was acceptable seating, and folded his hands. The first is that in certain applications, the wand's translation layer is actually useful. Precision work. Spell work that requires very specific shaping. The wand provides structural definition that raw magic resists. He paused. Your power is not naturally precise. It is large. Precision will be something you work to develop, and the wand assists that. What's the second reason? The second reason is that if you walk into the British magical world performing magic without a wand, at age 11, they will attempt to classify you as a threat before you've said hello. Poseidon's expression was dry. They are not, as a culture, comfortable with things they cannot categorize. A wand is a category. Let them have it. The wand does not limit you, your magic is too large to be constrained by any channel, but it gives them a framework within which they can process you without having an institutional crisis. Harry thought about this for a moment. That's surprisingly political of you. I am very old, Poseidon said. I have watched civilizations argue themselves into extinction over the failure to manage introductions properly. He stood. The wand. Get one. Use it when it is useful. Set it aside when it is not. And do not explain the difference to anyone who does not already understand it. And the soul fragment? Harry asked. The topic hung between them in the trench. Poseidon looked at him without blinking for long enough that the thermal current Harry was maintaining wobbled slightly. The soul fragment, Poseidon said. Yes. It is time for that. He moved toward Harry and Harry stayed still, completely, deliberately still, the way he'd learned in 3 years of not flinching from anything. This will be uncomfortable. You said the storm work would be uncomfortable and I was fine. This is more uncomfortable than the storm work. Poseidon placed 2 fingers against Harry's forehead, against the scar, and said, in a voice that dropped 2 octaves below where human hearing normally tracked, something in a language that was older than Greek, older than Atlantean, older than almost anything Harry's sigil training had records of. The discomfort was an understatement. It wasn't pain, exactly. It was more like having something extracted from a place so deep and fundamental that the extraction itself felt like a violation of physics. Like pulling a hook from somewhere that hooks had no business being. Harry felt the soul fragment resist. It had been there for 10 years, it had roots, and he felt Poseidon's power close around it the way the ocean closes around something that doesn't belong in it, inexorable, patient, and ultimately absolute. The fragment came out. Harry didn't fall. He swayed, once, and then planted his feet on the trench floor and breathed. The thermal current he'd been maintaining hadn't even dropped. He was rather proud of that. Poseidon held the fragment, a wisp of something dark and writhing in his palm, something that looked like smoke trying to be a scream, and looked at it with the expression of someone examining something deeply unpleasant. This piece of Voldemort, he said, will not be returning to its owner. He closed his fist. When he opened it again, his palm was empty. It is gone. Gone where? Harry asked. Into the deep, Poseidon said. Nothing returns from the deep. He looked at Harry's forehead. The scar was still there, it would always be there, the mark of what had happened, but the lightning bolt shape had faded from angry red to a silver white, old and settled, more like a story than a wound. How do you feel? Harry checked. It was the same question Mara asked after hard training and he developed the habit of actually checking, actually scanning the whole system rather than defaulting to the fine. He felt lighter. Not weak, not depleted, but lighter. As though something had been adding weight so slowly over 10 years that he'd stopped noticing it and its removal was only obvious in retrospect. Like I've been walking around with something in my shoe, he said, and I just took my shoe off. Poseidon looked at him for a moment. That, he said, is the least dignified metaphor for the removal of a Dark Lord's soul fragment that I have ever heard. Do you have a better one? A pause. No, Poseidon admitted. It is accurate. He turned toward the trench wall. Come. There are 2 months left before you go. We are going to spend them on precision work. Your large power is not the concern is threading it through a wand without the wand simply detonating. Has a wand detonated before? Harry asked, following him up along the trench wall. Your grandfather's, the first time he tried to perform a summoning charm at full force. The fragments were in the classroom ceiling for a decade. Poseidon looked back at him. Your precision needs work. My precision is fine. Your precision, Poseidon said, is adequate. For someone who is not going to a school full of 11-year-olds performing their first controlled spells in close proximity. Fair, Harry said, and they rose from the trench into open ocean and began again. August arrived and left, and on September 1st Harry stood in his room in Atlantis and looked at what he was packing. It wasn't much. He'd learned in 4 years of Atlantean living that material possessions were mostly management overhead, Atlantis didn't have the kind of consumer infrastructure that the surface world did, and most of what he needed daily was either worn or trained into him. Into the trunk, standard school issue, obtained through an intermediary because owl ordering to Atlantis remained logistically interesting, went his textbooks, his wand from a shop in Diagon Alley that Arthur had taken him to the previous week and which had been an experience unto itself, his Atlantean focus disc on its cord around his neck, and a small sealed case from Mara that she said contained items she considered essential and that he was not to open until he was alone because she'd included a letter and she wasn't having anyone watching her write letters. He opened the case on the train, which Mara later said was not exactly what she meant by alone but she supposed it was close enough. The letter was written in Mara's precise, slightly too elegant handwriting on Atlantean paper that was technically seaweed-derived and probably waterproof. Harry, I am not good at this kind of letter so I will be direct. You are the best student I have ever trained and I have trained soldiers who went on to defend Atlantis in 3 major engagements. I do not say that to burden you. I say it because you should walk into that school knowing exactly what you are. You are trained. You are capable. You are not the scared child that the surface world lost 4 years ago and you are under absolutely no obligation to pretend to be. If anyone, teacher, student, or ancient wizard with a plan for you, makes you feel small, remember that you redirected a North Atlantic storm system at 10 years old and the storm moved. Any questions, right? I check the relay currents twice a week. Mara. P.S. I put 3 jars of the preserved kelp that you like in the bottom of the case. Do not tell Arthur I included food. He will say it was unnecessary and then feel left out. Harry folded the letter and put it inside his robes, next to his heart. The train was loud. He'd forgotten about loud. Atlantis had sound, significant sound, the constant background of current and structure and 40,000 people living in close proximity, but it was oceanic sound, which had a quality of depth and distribution that made it unobtrusive even at volume. The Hogwarts Express was loud in the small specific way of a confined metal space full of children, and Harry sat in his compartment and recalibrated his sensory processing for it the way Aldrich had taught him to recalibrate for unfamiliar environments. He'd been in the compartment alone for about 40 minutes, watching England go past the window with the particular attention of someone cataloging a place they've decided to study, when the door slid open. 2 of them. A boy with red hair in a robe situation that suggested financial constraint treated with cheerful disregard, and a girl with brown hair and a stack of books that suggested she had prepared for this journey the way generals prepare for campaigns. Is it all right if we sit here? The girl asked. Everywhere else is full. Fine with me, Harry said. They settled. The red-haired boy opened a paper bag that smelled strongly of something sweet and the girl opened the top book in her stack and began reading as though she'd been mid-sentence. Harry watched both of them with the open curiosity of someone who has learned that watching people teaches you things asking doesn't. The red-haired boy noticed. I'm Ron, he said. Ron Weasley. Harry said. The girl looked up from her book. Hermione Granger, she said. Have you looked at the textbooks yet? I've been through all of them twice. The theory in A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration is actually not as basic as the title suggests. The underlying principles of matter-state modification are. She stopped. Sorry. I do that. Don't stop, Harry said. Matter-state modification in transfiguration, does it work on the same underlying principle as elemental state manipulation in older magical traditions? The conversion energy requirements? Hermione stared at him. You've read the older texts. Some of them. The Atlantean Academy Library has a surface magic collection. Harry said it naturally, the way you mention anything factual, without building a stage for it. Ron's sweet had stopped halfway to his mouth. The Atlantean Academy, he said. I've been living there. Since I was 7. You've been living in Atlantis, Ron said. Is that actually real? Hermione said, with the expression of someone encountering information that conflicts with previously confident certainty. Atlantis is real, Harry said. Very. About 400 miles west of here, 2 miles down. He looked at the window, at England going past. Good library. Hermione closed her book. This, Harry would learn, was the equivalent of someone putting down their phone to give you full attention, a significant act. But that means, who trained you? The Atlanteans use a completely different magical framework. How does it intersect with conventional wizarding? We're going to get along, Harry said, with a certainty that wasn't arrogance but assessment. Hermione blinked. Then she laughed, which was the genuine unguarded kind, and said, yes, I think we probably are. Ron was still holding his sweet. Are you the Harry Potter? He asked. Harry looked at him levelly. I'm the only Harry Potter I know of. Right, no, I mean, you're the one who, you know. You know who? The whole, Ron gestured vaguely at his own forehead. My mum thought you were dead. Everyone thought you were dead. Or living with muggles somewhere. I was with muggles, Harry said. Until I was 7. Then I was in the Atlantic Ocean. Ron absorbed this. That's mental, he said, with genuine admiration. Absolutely mental. You want a chocolate frog? The three of them ate sweets and talked for 4 hours, and when the trolley came Harry bought everything on it because he had the budget from Arthur, who had insisted, and he liked feeding people, which was a thing he hadn't known about himself until he saw Ron's eyes light up at the quantity of food. Hermione tried to maintain reading between conversational stretches but gave up by the 3rd hour, which Harry recognized as its own kind of compliment. By the time the train reached Hogsmeade he knew Ron's family in outline, 7 children, both parents magical, warm and chaotic in the way that large families are, and Hermione's in somewhat more detail because Hermione explained things in detail, both parents dentists, first-generation magical, had read every book Flourish and Blots carried in preparation. He liked them both with the straightforward clarity of someone who had learned that genuine connection was too valuable to be cagey about. Hagrid was at the platform. Harry had been briefed on Hagrid. Aldrich's files on the wizarding world had covered key personnel with the thoroughness of an intelligence dossier, and the briefing had not adequately conveyed the scale of the man, which Harry appreciated on a technical level. He was enormous in the legitimate way, the way of someone whose physical existence had simply decided to argue with average. Harry Potter. Hagrid boomed, and his face, partially obscured by the kind of beard that suggested a long-standing boundary dispute between the man and his razor, did something warm and enormous. Last time I saw ya, we're just a baby. You're the image of your father, no, got your mother's eyes, people keep saying that, Harry said, with the warmth of someone who finds the statement genuinely welcome rather than uncomfortable. You knew them? Knew them? Course I knew them. Great people, your parents. Great people. Hagrid looked at him with the particular gentleness of a very large person who is trying to be careful with something important. I was the one who brought ya to the Dursleys, back, I'm sorry about that, by the way. If I'd known what you didn't know, Harry said. And it worked out. He looked at the man steadily. I'm glad you're here. Hagrid's beard moved in a way that suggested considerable emotion happening behind it. The boats across the lake were, for Harry, a kind of homecoming in reverse. He was approaching land from water rather than the other way around, which was not his natural direction, but the lake was deep and old and it recognized him. He felt at the moment the boat touched water. Not the Atlantic, nothing would ever be the Atlantic, but old, alive, with currents that ran through the bedrock and something very large and very patient living in the depths, and the lake received him with the steady acceptance of water receiving water. The giant squid surfaced alongside their boat and looked at Harry. Harry looked back. He sent a small recognition pulse through the water, friendly, greeting-shaped, and the squid's chromatophores rippled in a pattern that was unmistakably a response. Did that squid just say hello to you? Ron asked. Kind of, Harry said. Mental, Ron said, with renewed admiration. Hogwarts from the water was something that had its own logic, built on a headland above a lake, ancient and vertical and lit in the September night like something imagined by someone who loved castles but had never been constrained by structural practicality. Harry looked at it and found he felt something. Not nostalgia, he had no memory of this place, but something more like recognition of a type. Like meeting a distant relative you've never seen before but can identify from the family nose. His mother had walked those corridors. His father too. Some part of whatever he was had started here, or near here, in this tradition, in this world. He held that for a moment and then the boats hit the bank and Hagrid was ushering them all forward and the moment passed into forward motion where it belonged. The sorting was not what Harry had expected, which was a thought he had to unpack because he'd been carefully managing his expectations. The sorting hat was a piece of magic that had been doing its job for 1,000 years and Harry had enormous respect for the engineering of it. Enchantment at that scale and duration was genuinely impressive, the magical equivalent of a structure that had been maintaining itself in the deep ocean without servicing. When it was placed on his head, he felt it begin its assessment with the slightly invasive quality of anything that reads minds. He let it read. There was nothing in there he was hiding. Well, said the hat, and its mental voice had the quality of old paper and long perspective, this is interesting. I haven't had anyone quite like this in, possibly ever. You're aware I'm assessing you? Yes, Harry thought back. Most students don't engage with the assessment. It seemed rude not to. A pause. You have the courage for Gryffindor. Considerable courage, actually, the kind that comes from having had it tested rather than the kind that comes from not having been tested yet. That's different. Another pause. You also have a mind that would thrive in Ravenclaw, the cross-disciplinary synthesis work you do is extraordinary. And there's the ambition, the sense of one's own power and capacity, that Slytherin material, though yours has an interesting texture. It's not social ambition. It's oceanic. Yes. That's the right word for it. What about Hufflepuff? Harry thought. You are enormously loyal, the hat said, with what sounded almost like humor. But we both know which house fits. Yes, Harry agreed. Gryffindor. The hat shouted, and the Gryffindor table erupted. Ron was sorted Gryffindor 3 people later and immediately dropped into the seat next to Harry with the expression of someone relieved at a familiar face. Hermione, sorted Gryffindor shortly after, sat across from them with the look of someone who had decided she was going to be competent at this and had already started. The feast was extraordinary and Harry ate with genuine appetite, which was easier when you'd been raised on Atlantean cuisine that kept surprising you. After 4 years of that, nothing on this table was intimidating. He was being watched. He knew it. The whole hall had a quality of distributed attention, the way a room feels when many people are trying to appear not to be looking at one specific point. He didn't look back, mostly. He ate and talked with Ron and Hermione and watched the teacher's table with the methodical attention Mara had trained into him. The teacher's table was information-rich. Hagrid, enormous and warm. McGonagall, precise and watchful, had already glanced at him 3 times with the expression of someone beginning to solve a problem. Quirrell, turbaned, nervous, something wrong with the quality of his presence in the room that Harry felt rather than saw, the water in the castle's stone carried currents, and Quirrell sat in those currents like something that didn't sit right, a temperature differential that didn't match its surroundings. And at the center, presiding, Albus Dumbledore. Harry had read everything available on Dumbledore, which was considerable, given that the man had been central to British wizarding history for 80 years, and the reading had given him a clear picture of a genuinely formidable mind operating from a position of total certainty about its own good intentions. That combination, Harry had found, was often more dangerous than malice, because malice at least knew what it was. Dumbledore looked at Harry once during the feast, with those half-moon glasses and that particular attentive gaze. Harry met the look steadily and held it for 3 seconds before Dumbledore's eyes moved on, and in those 3 seconds Harry felt the edges of a skilled legilimency probe. He closed his mind with the automatic ease of someone who had been trained in mental defense by a god, and felt Dumbledore register the closure, and watched Dumbledore's expression remain perfectly pleasant and give nothing away at all. Interesting, Harry thought. Very good. And very deliberate. After the feast, as the first years were being led to Gryffindor Tower by Percy Weasley, Ron's brother, who had the air of someone who had decided that rules were a personality, Harry fell slightly behind the group. He put his hand flat against the stone wall of the corridor. The castle was old. Older than he'd realized, older than any surface structure he'd been near. The stone had been here for a millennium and it remembered everything, had absorbed 1,000 years of magic, of people, of the particular ambient energy of a place where power was taught and used and lived in. It wasn't the ocean. It didn't speak in water language. But it was alive, in the way that all very old things that have absorbed enough time become alive, and when Harry pressed his palm to it he felt a resonance. Not hydrokinesis. Not storm calling. Something older in him than either, the part that was just him, the magical core that had been in Lily Potter's son before the quarry, before Atlantis, before Poseidon's instruction. The part that had bloomed Mrs. Fig's neighbor's roses in winter. The castle recognized it. Something in the stone shifted, not physically, not noticeably, but in the way that very old and very aware things shift when they decide to accept something. "You coming?" Ron called from ahead, having noticed him standing still. Harry took his hand off the wall. "Yeah," he said, and went. In his dormitory that night, Neville Longbottom on one side, Ron on the other, Dean Thomas and Seamus Finnegan completing the arrangement, Harry lay on his back and looked at the stone ceiling and thought about the day. He thought about the sorting hat and what it had said about his ambition having an oceanic texture. He thought about Dumbledore's legitimacy probe and what it said about the kind of control the man liked to have. He thought about Quirrell and the wrong temperature quality of him, the thing that sat in the castle's water currents like something that didn't belong. He thought about his mother's world, real and present around him, old stone and firelight and the smell of something that was neither ocean nor surface but its own category. He put his hand over the focused disc on its cord and felt the warmth of deep water in a stone room. He thought, "This is going to be more interesting than I expected." Which was saying something, given that his expectations had been set by 4 years in Atlantis. He was nearly asleep when the common room portrait hole opened and he heard a voice, low, careful, in the corridor outside. He wasn't trying to listen. But 4 years of Atlantean sensory training meant that sounds arrived with more information than normal people extracted from them, and the voice's particular quality reached him without effort. Dumbledore. Not speaking to anyone in the corridor, speaking to something. A charm, maybe. The words were too quiet to catch. But the tone was unmistakable, the tone of someone adjusting a plan, recalibrating, deciding that something they thought they understood had arrived differently than expected. Harry smiled slightly at the ceiling. Tomorrow, he thought, he was going to find out what was on the 3rd floor. Not because he'd been told not to. Dumbledore's announcement at the feast had carried the specific quality of a man who knows that telling children not to do something is the most efficient way to make them do it, and Harry had no interest in that game. But because the 3rd floor had a quality he'd felt the moment Dumbledore mentioned it, a current in the castle's old stone that said significant and deliberate and placed here on purpose. The philosopher's stone was real. He'd known about it from wizarding history, Nicholas Flamel, immortality, the stone and its properties. He knew someone was going to try for it this year. He didn't know yet if Dumbledore knew who. He was fairly certain Dumbledore knew. He was fairly certain Dumbledore thought he had a plan. He closed his eyes and slept, and outside the castle windows the lake moved with the deep patient currents of something very old, and in those currents a recognition pulse returned from deep water, received, understood, here. The sea had followed him to Scotland. Of course it had. It always would. Chapter 4, Storm in a Dungeon. The first week of classes taught Harry 3 things about the wizarding world. The first was that magic, as taught at Hogwarts, was treated as a collection of separate subjects rather than a unified system, which was the pedagogical equivalent of teaching someone music by having them study rhythm on Monday, melody on Tuesday, and harmony on Wednesday without ever playing an instrument. It wasn't wrong exactly. It was just incomplete, in a way that produced technically proficient students who had no intuition for what they were actually doing. The second was that the gap between what students could do and what magic was capable of was enormous, and most of the gap was psychological. They believed themselves limited and so they were. The belief was structural, built into them by years of being told that magic had rules, had proper forms, had approved methodologies. Harry found this both fascinating and slightly heartbreaking. The third was that Hogwarts had more political complexity per square foot than the Atlantean Council, which was saying something because the Atlantean Council had recently spent 4 months arguing about current navigation rights in a 2-mile stretch of the Azores. The Slytherin problem introduced itself on the third day. Draco Malfoy had clearly decided, before term started, exactly how Hogwarts was going to work and what his role in it would be, and this decision had been made with the confidence of someone who had never encountered significant friction between his plans and reality. He was sharp, genuinely intelligent, and had a talent for reading social dynamics that would have been impressive if he directed it at anything more constructive than establishing a hierarchy that put him at the top. Harry had identified him as the third most interesting person at Hogwarts on the first night, behind Dumbledore and Quirrell, and had been waiting to see what approach he'd take. The approach he took was the broomstick corridor. Harry had been walking back from an early morning session in the library. He'd found the restricted section's physical organization interesting, the books arranged by something other than alphabetical order, and he'd been studying the pattern, when Malfoy stepped out of a side corridor with Crabbe and Goyle in attendance. They had the comfortable formation of people who practiced this. "Potter," Malfoy said, with the precise inflection of someone using a name as a weapon. "I've been meaning to have a word." Harry stopped and turned. "All right," he said. Malfoy seemed briefly nonplussed by the absence of any defensive reaction, but recovered quickly. "I've been watching you this week," he said. "In classes. You don't use your wand the way everyone else does." "I use it differently," Harry agreed. "Not worse. That's not the point. The point is you're odd. Even for someone with your reputation." He said reputation with the particular curl of someone who hasn't decided yet whether the thing being referenced is impressive or threatening and has defaulted to dismissive while he figures it out. "People are talking about you. Where you've been. The Atlantis story." "It's not a story," Harry said. "Nobody lives in Atlantis." "I did. I do, during summers." Harry looked at him with genuine interest. "Is this going somewhere?" "I was heading to breakfast." Malfoy's jaw tightened, not dramatically, just the slight muscle movement of someone recalibrating their approach. "My father," he said, "has certain expectations about how things work at Hogwarts. About the kind of alliances that are worth having." Harry looked at him for a moment. He thought about what Poseidon had said about the surface magical world: they are not comfortable with things they cannot categorize. He thought about what Mara had written in her letter: "You are not the scared child that the surface world lost 4 years ago." "Draco," he said, and used the first name deliberately, the way you use a first name to change the register of a conversation. "I'm going to be honest with you because I think you're smart enough to appreciate it. I'm not going to be collected by anyone. Not by your father's expectations, not by Dumbledore's plans, not by anything else. I'm here because I chose to be and on my own terms." He paused. "That said, you're interesting. I mean that. You see things. If you ever want to talk to me as yourself rather than as your father's representative, I'm around." Malfoy stared at him. Crabbe and Goyle looked at each other in the way of people who have been removed from a script they expected to follow. "That's," Malfoy started. "Breakfast," Harry said, and walked past all 3 of them and kept walking, and didn't look back. Behind him, he heard Malfoy say nothing for a full 5 seconds, which was a longer thinking silence than Harry had expected from him. He filed it as encouraging. Potions was on Thursday. Harry had read Snape's academic history with the attention he gave to all significant people: 6 years of student, decades of teacher, Death Eater turned spy, the most complex loyalty structure in the British wizarding world, and a man who was carrying a private grief that had calcified, over years, into a particular kind of armor. He'd also read that Snape's classes had a consistent quality of aggression that was specifically directed at Gryffindors, and specifically at Harry's father's memory, and that this was generally regarded as something students simply had to navigate. Harry had a different perspective on things people had simply decided to navigate. The classroom was cold and smelled of preserved things, and Snape arrived without ceremony and began with roll call that turned into a directed interrogation of Harry's knowledge before Harry had said 3 words. Potter. Snape's voice had a quality that was genuinely impressive, low, precise, with the specific weight of someone who has spent decades perfecting the delivery of sentences designed to find gaps in confidence and apply pressure. Our new celebrity. He said it with the delicacy of someone placing a blade edge down. Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? The class went quiet in the way classes go quiet when they recognize that something is happening that is going to be talked about later. Hermione's hand shot up beside Harry. He appreciated the gesture and didn't need it. Draught of living death, Harry said. It's a sleeping potion of extraordinary strength, genuinely extraordinary. The magical chemistry of the wormwood-asphodel interaction produces a sedation effect that operates on the core rather than the body, which is why the sleep it produces is so difficult to reverse and why Wiggenweld potion specifically is the countermeasure rather than any of the more common wake stimulants. Snape had not been expecting that. The pause before his next question was small but real. Where would you look, he continued, with only slightly less certainty, if I told you to find me a bezoar? Stomach of a goat. The calcium phosphate matrix in a bezoar selectively binds certain alkaloid compounds that constitute the active agents in most common poisons. It's not a cure-all, it doesn't work on all poisons and there's a fairly well-documented failure mode with hemlock derivatives, but it's the most broadly effective first-response antidote available without specialist preparation. Harry paused. The Atlantean pharmacopoeia has a synthesized equivalent that works more broadly, but it's not available through standard wizarding supply chains. The class was extremely quiet. Snape's expression had moved through several phases that Harry had followed with interest: surprise suppressed, reassessment, the specific irritation of a man whose preferred dynamic has been disrupted. What is the difference, Snape said, very quietly, between monkshood and wolfsbane? Same plant, Harry said. Aconitum. Also called aconite. The distinction between the names is botanical tradition rather than meaningful taxonomic difference. Monkshood refers to the flower shape, wolfsbane to the folklore application. The active compound in all 3 is aconitine, a neurotoxin. He looked at Snape directly. I can discuss the toxicology further if it's useful, but I suspect you already know it. Another pause. Snape looked at him with the coal-black eyes that missed nothing and the expression of a man engaged in rapid internal revision. It seems, Snape said finally, in a voice that had shed most of its original weaponization and retained something more complex, that fame is not, in this instance, entirely unearned. He turned to the board. The rest of you will open your books to Chapter 1. We are making a simple boil cure potion. Try not to melt your cauldrons. Ron leaned toward Harry and whispered, nobody has ever made Snape say something like that. He said it to the class, Harry said. He said it about you. Technically. That's the most positive thing he said to a Gryffindor since before my brothers were here. I'll try not to set the standard too high, Harry said, and began preparing his ingredients. He made a perfect boil cure potion and set it on the desk at the end of class, still at precise temperature, the color a full shade better than the specifications required, and left without making an event of it. He noticed Snape looking at it as he went, with the expression of someone who has received unexpected data. Flying class was on Friday and Harry had been looking forward to it with the specific anticipation of someone who knows something is going to be easy and plans to enjoy it. The brooms were old clean sweeps, well maintained but tired in the way of equipment that had been used by many people and cared for by too few. Madame Hooch was brisk and professional and introduced the mechanics with the economy of someone who'd given this lesson several hundred times. Harry's broom came to his hand on the first call. He knew it would. The charm was a directed current, essentially, and directing currents was his most basic training. He just reached toward the broom with the same opening that let him feel the water around him, and it snapped up before he'd finished the word up. He noticed Hermione's expression, controlled but impressed, and Ron's, which was not controlled at all. He also noticed Malfoy watching him with renewed intensity. Neville's incident with the broom, shooting up uncontrolled, gaining height, losing a remembrall, crash landing, happened fast, and Harry was already moving when Hooch was still reaching for Neville. He got to Neville first, which wasn't difficult since Hooch's priority was getting the class settled, and helped Neville up with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone who has helped injured people before. "You're all right," Harry said. "Breathe. The wrist is sprained, not broken. You'd know if it was broken." "How can you tell?" Neville asked, through genuine tears that he was trying to control. "The way you're holding it. Broken has a different posture." Harry looked at the wrist. "Madam Hooch is going to take you to the hospital wing. You'll be fine." Neville looked at him with the wet, grateful eyes of someone in pain who has been spoken to like a person rather than a problem. "Thank you," he said. Meanwhile, Malfoy had retrieved the remembrall and was doing something theatrical with it, and Hooch was disappearing around the corner with Neville, and the class was developing the excited tension of a situation where established authority has temporarily vacated. Malfoy tossed the remembrall in the air and looked at Harry. "Want to try and get it, Potter?" he asked. Harry looked at the remembrall. He looked at Malfoy. He looked at the assembled class, the dynamic of it, the moment Malfoy was creating, because he'd decided this was how he reclaimed the narrative of the week. Then he got on his broom. He was in the air before anyone fully registered he'd moved. The clean sweep was old and tired, but it responded to him the way the Atlantic had responded to his first storm call, willingly, fully, because Harry's relationship with movement through fluid was elemental, and a broom flying through air was, at its core, a very similar mechanical problem to a body moving through water. Current, resistance, pressure differential, direction of force. He was very good at this. He went to 300 feet in the time it took the class below to fully register he'd left the ground. At 300 feet the wind was different, colder, sharper, with the particular quality of Scottish autumn air above a body of water, and he felt the lake below him like a handshake. He hung there for a moment just feeling it. Then he looked at Malfoy, way below, small and upward facing. He dropped. Not a controlled descent, a drop, a direct vertical fall at the speed of someone who has spent years in deep ocean currents where pressure and movement are the same thing, and fear of speed is a thing you either train out of yourself or you don't last. He pulled level at 15 feet, transition from vertical to horizontal executed with the precision Poseidon had spent months developing in him, the broom screaming along the ground at a height that left grass marks, and he plucked the remembrall from Malfoy's hand, not from where Malfoy threw it, Malfoy hadn't thrown it yet, directly from Malfoy's hand, and was back at 100 feet before the class found its collective breath. He came down slowly, returned the remembrall to the ground, and got off the broom. The class was silent. Then Seamus Finnegan said, very quietly, "Bloody hell." Ron grabbed Harry's arm. "McGonagall saw," he said, low and urgent. "She was watching from the window. You're going to get, she's coming down right now, you can see her at the—" "I know," Harry said. McGonagall came across the grass with the brisk purpose of someone for whom brisk purpose was a lifestyle, and when she reached Harry she looked at him with an expression that was trying to be severe and was being undermined by something else entirely. "Come with me, Potter," she said. "Now." He went. Behind him the class erupted. McGonagall led him through the castle in silence that she maintained all the way to a specific corridor on the 3rd floor, not the forbidden section, a different part, and knocked on a door. "Come in," said Oliver Wood. Harry spent the next 30 minutes in a conversation about Quidditch that had the quality of something important being transacted between people who both understand what is happening. Wood was a 6th year with the focused passion of someone for whom one thing is the organizing principle of existence, and he took Harry through the fundamentals with the efficiency of extreme enthusiasm. "Seeker," Wood said. "You're a natural seeker. The dive you just did, I've never seen anything like it from someone on their first flight." "It wasn't my first flight," Harry said. Wood stopped. What? First time on a broomstick. But flying is just, it's movement through fluid. I've done a lot of that. Wood looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone encountering a variable they don't have a slot for. Then he decided, with the pragmatism of someone whose priority is the upcoming Quidditch season, that it didn't matter what the explanation was if the result was what it was. Can you come to practice Saturday morning? Yes, Harry said. McGonagall walked Harry back to the corridor when Wood was done and said, when they were out of earshot, your flying was exceptional. Thank you, Professor. The Malfoy boys remember, she said. You took it from his hand. Not while it was thrown. He wasn't going to throw it, Harry said. He was going to keep it. He wanted the confrontation to last longer than the throw would allow. McGonagall stopped walking and looked at him. Harry waited. How, she said, carefully, did you read that from the ground before you were in the air? I've been trained to read situations, Harry said. The body language was clear. He was enjoying the remembrall, it was leverage. People don't throw leverage, they hold it. McGonagall looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone updating a mental file that they thought was already complete. You've been living in Atlantis, she said. Not a question. Since I was 7. She was quiet for a moment. Your parents, she said. James was an excellent flyer. Lily was, a pause. Lily was exceptional in ways that nobody quite had the right vocabulary for. She looked at his forehead briefly, at the silver-white scar. She would have found you remarkable, she said, and the words were careful, chosen, real. She would have been very proud. Harry let that settle. Thank you, he said, and meant it fully. Halloween arrived the way significant dates always arrive at Hogwarts, with atmosphere, with decoration, with the particular charged quality of a building that has absorbed 1,000 years of celebration and adds its own weight to each new iteration. Floating candles and real bats and a feast that McGonagall had once described to a colleague as Dumbledore's one genuine aesthetic indulgence. Harry was eating and not thinking about Halloween specifically, he was thinking about the 3rd floor and what he'd felt there when he'd scouted it twice this week, the layered enchantments over the trapdoor that he'd identified from 20 feet away because the castle's ambient magic carried the signature of deliberate wardwork, multiple casters, high investment, when Quirrell ran into the Great Hall. He was screaming. Troll! Quirrell shouted, with the breathless quality of someone who had either genuinely just encountered a troll or was performing genuinely having just encountered a troll. In the dungeons. Thought you ought to know. He fainted. The hall erupted. Dumbledore's voice rose above it with the authority of someone who has managed large group panic before, directing prefects, calling for calm, and Harry sat still in the noise and mapped the situation. Quirrell's faint was wrong. Not dramatically wrong, the performance was technically good, but wrong in the temperature of the room way, the way something wrong in the water registered before the conscious mind caught up. The panic he displayed had no sweat component, no genuine physiological correlate that Harry could read from this distance. He'd run in at full commitment and exited via fainting with the deliberateness of someone who wanted to be out of the way for what came next. Which meant the troll's placement was intentional. Which meant Quirrell knew where the troll was before he'd announced it. Which meant, Hermione, Harry said, cutting through the chaos of the bench rearranging itself as students followed prefect directions. She went to the bathroom during the feast. Which bathroom? Ron went pale. The one near the dungeons, I think she said. Harry was already moving. He went against the flow of evacuation, which was not difficult because he was smaller than most of what was evacuating and because the specific quality of his movement, the water-trained efficiency, no wasted motion, meant that he covered ground in a crowd differently than most people. Ron followed him, because Ron, Harry had already understood, was someone who made decisions with his stomach rather than his head and whose stomach was brave. They found Hermione in the second-floor bathroom, which was not near the dungeons. She'd gone upstairs, and she was pressed against the far wall making no sound, because the troll was in the room with her and Hermione was smart enough to have assessed that making noise was not her best option. The troll was enormous. 12 feet, gray-green, with the particular quality of stupidity that existed in something large enough that intelligence had never been necessary for survival. It had a club the size of a mature tree trunk and it was swinging it at the sink fixtures with the satisfied energy of something that enjoys the noise of breaking things. Harry came through the door, assessed the space in approximately 1 second, and did not stop moving. "Hermione," he said, normal voice, because shouting was for people who needed attention and he needed the troll's attention on him and not on Hermione. "Get to the door behind me." The troll heard him and turned. It focused on Harry with the limited focusing apparatus of 12 feet of mountain troll intelligence and raised its club. Harry felt the castle's water, the pipes in the walls, the cisterns above the bathroom, the plumbing that ran through the stone in the way of a building this old that had been retrofitted with water systems over centuries. He felt all of it the way he'd feel a current at his back. He pulled the water from the pipes above the troll's head. Not the troll's head specifically. The pipe above the troll's head, the one running to the cistern, 8 inches in diameter and full. He reached into the stone and pulled that pipe free from its fittings with a controlled application of pressure that felt, to him, like extending a finger. The pipe came away from the wall. The water hit the troll directly from above, 4 inches of pressure over a 12-foot target area, and the force of it drove the troll straight down. The club went wide, hit the far wall, demolished 4 sinks. The troll, drenched and confused, shook its enormous head and looked for Harry. Harry was directly in front of it. He'd moved while the water was falling. He looked at the troll for a moment. He felt mildly sorry for it, which was something Mara had warned him about. She'd said he had a tendency to empathize with large things, but it had been deliberately placed here and someone was going to be held accountable for that, and it wasn't the troll. He reached up and put his hand against the wet stone floor. It was wet now, everything was wet, and sent a pulse through the water film covering the bathroom tiles. It traveled through every water molecule in the room simultaneously, a sharp pressure compression that hit the troll's inner ear from below. The troll went down. Not hurt. Not seriously. Just profoundly confused by something it had no context for and unconscious in the way of something whose equilibrium has been completely disrupted. Harry straightened. Ron was in the doorway with his wand out and an expression of someone who had prepared himself to do something very brave and brave had not turned out to be necessary, which is a slightly complicated emotional experience. Hermione was standing against the door frame. She was shaking, which was reasonable given what she'd just been in the room with, but her eyes were sharp and she'd been watching the whole sequence and Harry could tell by her face that she was already processing it. "That was hydrokinesis," she said. Harry looked at her. "Yes. You didn't use your wand." "No. You took the troll down with water from the plumbing." "The pipes were there," Harry said, reasonably. Hermione stared at him. Then she said, "I have so many questions." "I know. Later." Harry heard footsteps, multiple, rapid, the distinctive sound of teachers arriving at somewhere they expected to manage, and reached for his wand because Poseidon had been right about the wand being useful as a category. He held it in his hand as McGonagall, Snape, and Quirrell came through the door. The 3 teachers stopped. They looked at the unconscious troll. They looked at the destroyed sinks. They looked at the water covering every surface of the bathroom. They looked at Harry, Ron, and Hermione. McGonagall's expression moved through several stages. "Can someone explain," she said, in the measured tone of someone choosing each word carefully, "exactly what happened here?" "Troll," Harry said. Hermione was in the bathroom. "We came to find her. I dealt with the troll." Snape was looking at the damage with an expression Harry couldn't quite read. It was too layered, containing too many things at once. His eyes moved to Harry and stayed there. Quirrell was looking at the troll with an expression that was definitely not the expression of someone who was surprised by this outcome. It was almost, Harry watched it precisely, the expression of someone making rapid calculations about a result that hadn't matched their projection. He filed that. You dealt with the troll, McGonagall said. A mountain troll. Which is classified as an XXXXX creature by the Ministry. I used the plumbing, Harry said. A pause that had several layers. The plumbing, McGonagall said. The pipe above it. Water pressure, applied correctly, is more effective than most conventional responses to something that large. Harry looked at the troll. It isn't seriously hurt. The pressure disrupted its inner ear. It'll be confused for a few hours. Snape made a sound that was not quite anything identifiable. McGonagall turned away briefly and looked at the wall in a manner that suggested she needed a moment. 5 points to Gryffindor, she said finally, turning back. 4, presence of mind. And 10 points, each, from Gryffindor for being here in the first place. That's net -15, Ron said, and then immediately looked like he wished he hadn't. Yes, Mr. Weasley, McGonagall said. That is how arithmetic works. Quirrell levitated the troll with a wand movement that was technically excellent and unnecessarily complex, and Harry watched him do it with the steady attention of someone accumulating a file. As they left the bathroom, Quirrell ahead with the troll, Snape behind with the 3 students, McGonagall last, Harry positioned himself so that he was directly behind Quirrell for 30 seconds in a corridor where the torchlighting was uneven. In those 30 seconds, with the castle's ambient water carrying information the way it always did, he felt it clearly, the double temperature. Quirrell, ordinary wizard, frightened and calculating. And behind that, in Quirrell, something else. Something that was not Quirrell. Something cold and dark and very old, wrapped in a human body the way a parasite wraps in a host, feeding on it, maintaining itself. Voldemort. Harry felt the not quite there shape of it and noted its characteristics the way Aldrich had taught him to note things, without emotional escalation, with precision, with patience. He had suspected. Now he was certain. He said nothing in the corridor. He said nothing when McGonagall sent them back to the tower. He said nothing to Ron, who was already rebuilding his excitement into a story he could tell people, or to Hermione, who had recovered enough to look guilty about the points. He waited until they were in the common room and the crowd of returning Gryffindors had absorbed Ron into congratulatory retelling, and then he sat by the fire and thought. Voldemort was in the castle. In Quirrell, on the back of his head, he'd read about this in wizarding history, the fragmented form, but history was different from sensing it in person. He was here for the stone. The stone was on the 3rd floor behind enchantments that Harry had identified from 20 feet in a casual scouting pass. Dumbledore knew Voldemort would come. The traps were for Voldemort, or for whoever Voldemort was using. Dumbledore had built a trial, a gauntlet, something designed to test and delay an intruder while presumably someone who was in the know was alerted. Dumbledore, Harry suspected, also had a plan for what happened at the end of that gauntlet. A plan that involved Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the chosen piece on the board that Dumbledore had been arranging for since Harry's parents died. Harry looked at the fire. He was not Dumbledore's piece. He was not a piece at all. But the stone, if Voldemort got the stone, Voldemort had a path back to a body and genuine power, and that cascaded into things Harry cared about, the wizarding world, which contained people who mattered, and the surface world, which overlapped with the world his fathers governed and protected. So, the stone needed protecting. Voldemort needed stopping. He was going to do both on his own terms, in his own time, and he was going to do it decisively rather than dramatically. He got up from the fire and went to find Hermione. She was in the corner where she always went when she needed to think, which was near the window, with a book she wasn't reading. She looked up when he sat across from her. The troll, she said, immediately. It was deliberate. Someone put it there. Yes, Harry said. To create a distraction. She was putting it together fast, which was one of the most satisfying things about Hermione. She was fast in exactly the way that mattered, not at retrieval but at synthesis. So something else could happen somewhere else while the school was dealing with it. 3rd floor, Harry said. She looked at him. The forbidden corridor. Yes. You've been there. Twice. There's something down there, multiple enchantments layered over a trapdoor. It's well warded. Someone cares a lot about what's under it. Hermione bit her lip, thinking. Philosopher's Stone, she said. Harry looked at her steadily. What makes you say that? Nicholas Flamel, she said. I've been doing research since you mentioned cross-disciplinary magical theory on the train. The stone is the only object that fits all the criteria, the level of protection, the secrecy, the timing. Flamel reported it stolen last year and it was kept quiet, but the records, she stopped. There are records if you know what to look for. Good, Harry said. He meant it genuinely. Don't tell Ron yet. Not because I don't trust him, he's solid, but because he'll want to act immediately and I want to observe for another month before we move. Why a month? Because Voldemort isn't ready to move yet, Harry said, and watched Hermione go very still at the name. Don't do that, he said, gently. It's a name. He's not going to appear because you said it. He's in the castle already, in Quirrel, and he's building towards something. He moved tonight to test the defenses and learn the timing. He's not going for the stone immediately. He needs more information first. Hermione looked at him. How do you know he's in Quirrel? I felt it. Felt it how? Harry thought about how to explain the water sense to someone who'd never felt it without the technical vocabulary to bridge. There are ways of reading the environment, he said, that go beyond the 5 senses you're used to using. Atlantean training. I can feel anomalies in the ambient field, temperature, pressure, presence. Quirrel is carrying something that doesn't match what he appears to be. Hermione looked like she was going to have questions about this for the next several years, which was accurate. And Dumbledore? Knows more than he shows, Harry said. Is running a plan. His plan involves me. He paused. I have my own plan. Which is? Observe. Gather information. Make sure that when this comes to a head, I control the circumstances rather than being dropped into someone else's. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you need from me? Harry looked at her with the clean appreciation of someone who has found, in an unexpected place, exactly the kind of person they needed. Research, he said. Everything you can find on the stone's properties, Flamel's protective methodologies, historical attempts to breach similar enchantment structures. Aldrich taught me the Atlantean approach to warded objects, I want to cross-reference it with surface magical theory. I can do that, Hermione said. She had the expression of someone who has been given a problem that is exactly sized for them. But Harry, she hesitated. What you did tonight. In the bathroom. You didn't use your wand. No. The water came from the pipes. Yes. That's not standard wizarding magic. That's something else entirely. Yes, Harry said. It is. Hermione looked at him with the direct, uncomplicated assessment that he'd come to recognize as her specific form of trust, not faith, not assumption, but the rational conclusion of someone who has observed enough data. How much is there, she asked. Of the something else entirely? Harry thought about how to answer this honestly without being gratuitous about it. Enough, he said, that when we go after Voldemort, I'll be fine. Hermione nodded. She took it in, added it to whatever she was building in her head about Harry Potter, and moved on with the efficiency of someone for whom the most productive response to receiving important information is the question that comes after it. Right, she said. Research. I'll start tonight. The library section on alchemical protective structures. Do you want me to flag the Flamel-specific citations or do you want everything? Everything, Harry said. Cross-reference it with the enchantment signatures I described to you, I'll write them up tomorrow. Done. She opened her actual book now, for reading, not hiding behind, and then stopped. Harry. Yes. Thank you, she said. For the bathroom. You didn't have to, of course I did, Harry said, simply, and it was the simplest truth he'd said all day. He went to bed and lay on his back in the dark and thought about Quirrell, Voldemort and Dumbledore's gauntlet and the stone in its protected hole and the very specific chain of events that was building towards something that everyone around him seemed to think they controlled. Nobody controlled it, Harry thought. Events this size were more like weather than plans. You could read them, you could respond to them, you could redirect them. He knew how to redirect weather. He put his hand over the focus disk and felt the deep ocean 300 miles south and thought about what Poseidon had said in the North Atlantic in February, standing on 12-foot swells with him, call the storm, and the storm moves. Not because you are stronger than the storm. Because you are part of it. He slept. In the morning, he went to Quidditch practice and caught the practice snitch in 23 seconds, which made Wood sit down on his broom at 30 feet with an expression of pure, stunned religious feeling. The season, Harry thought, was going to be excellent. Chapter 5, The Trident and the Stone May arrived in Scotland like a correction, the grey and cold of the Scottish winter giving way to something tentative and green, the lake catching light differently, the grounds around the castle losing their severity. Harry noticed it the way he noticed everything environmental, with the whole-body attention of someone for whom the natural world was data rather than backdrop. He also noticed that Quirrell was getting desperate. The quality of desperation was different from the quality of planning. Harry had learned to read both, from Mara's tactical sessions and Poseidon's instruction and the 4 years of watching Atlantean political dynamics, which were complex enough to constitute a graduate education in human motivation. Planning had patience in it. Desperation had a frequency, a specific vibration in the ambient field, like a current that's been redirected too many times and has started to force its channel. Quirrell had been visiting the 3rd floor increasingly. Harry knew because the castle knew, and Harry and the castle had developed an understanding. He'd felt it begin on Halloween and it had deepened quietly through winter, the old stone accepting him the way it accepted everything it decided was native, which was a slow process and not something you could force but something that simply happened when you were genuinely present in a place rather than passing through it. He told Hermione in early May. She already suspected. The enchantments are thinning, she said. She had a map she'd made, hand-drawn, of the 3rd floor structure cross-referenced with every piece of research she'd compiled over the past 7 months, which was an impressive document by any standard. Not breaking, someone's been testing them. Probing. Looking for weaknesses. Quirrell, Harry said. He's running out of time, Hermione said. Whatever's driving him, driving Voldemort, the timeline is compressing. She looked at her notes. The stone's protections are layered by multiple teachers. Dumbledore's work is the outermost layer but I think the innermost, mirror, Harry said. She looked up. There's a mirror in there, Harry said. I felt it on my 3rd pass. The enchantment signature is different from the others, it's not word work, it's object-based. Something bound into a mirror. He'd spent the weeks between November and May doing what Poseidon had taught him to do with storms, reading the system before engaging it, understanding its structure completely before deciding where to apply force. It's the final protection. Whatever the mirror does, it's the last thing between Quirrell and the stone. Do you know how it works? Not exactly. But the signature feels like intent-based magic. What you want from the object determines what you get from it. He paused. That's an elegant trap. For someone who wants the stone, it might be impenetrable. And for someone who doesn't want to use it? Hermione said, following the logic. Different result. Harry looked at the map she'd made. There are 7 layers. I've identified all of them. Devil's Snare, Sprout's work, simple enough, light and no panic. Winged Keys, Flitwick, mobility problem, needs a flyer. Giant chess set, McGonagall, I watched her teaching Seamus to think 3 moves ahead, that's her signature. Troll, already encountered that architecture, though this one's presumably conscious. He counted on his fingers. Potion's logic puzzle, Snape, actually the most technically interesting, the solution's a riddle about properties and labeling. He looked at the 6th finger. Dumbledore's mirror last. That's only 6, Hermione said. The 7th isn't an enchantment, Harry said. It's a person. Quirrell himself. He's been down there, I think he's stuck at the mirror and it's driving him toward a crisis point. He looked at the window. He's going to try tonight. Hermione went still. How do you know it's tonight? Because Dumbledore left the castle this afternoon. Harry watched her process that. I felt the shift in the ward structure when he passed through the outer boundary. He's gone to London, called away. And Quirrell has been waiting for exactly that window. Hermione stared at him. Dumbledore left. Yes. Knowing that Quirrell, knowing Voldemort is, yes, Harry said again. He'd thought about this for days. He'd turned it over from every angle, and the conclusion remained the same, Dumbledore had left because Dumbledore wanted the gauntlet run. Not by Quirrell, Dumbledore clearly believed his protections would stop Quirrell. By Harry. This was the stage. This was the test. The trap on the 3rd floor was not only for the intruder. It was for the boy who lived. Dumbledore wanted to see what Harry would do. He'd decided what he was going to do 2 weeks ago. We're going tonight, Harry said. Hermione looked at him, then at her notes, then at him again. All 3 of us. You and Ron for the first sections, I want you both through the puzzle rooms and positioned safely before I go ahead. You are not, he said, meeting her eyes, coming past the chess set. Harry, the chess set is the last point where it's a puzzle rather than a confrontation. Past that, the troll, the potions, the mirror, those are things I need to handle alone. Not because I don't trust you. Because you'd be a liability not from lack of skill but from Voldemort's willingness to use you against me. He said it cleanly, without softening. He wouldn't think twice. I need you out of that range. Hermione's jaw was set, but she was listening. And Ron? Ron will want to argue about the chess set, Harry said. He won't argue for long because he'll work out the same logic you just did. He paused. Also, the chess set is genuinely his strength. Let him have that. She took a breath. Tonight. After curfew. The common room will be quiet by 11. We go at 11:30. She nodded. Then she did something unexpected, she reached across the table and put her hand briefly on his arm. Be careful, she said. Not in the way that people say it when they mean be less brave. In the way that people say it when they mean you matter and I want you back. Always, Harry said, and meant it as literally as he meant most things. Ron took it almost exactly as Harry had predicted. He listened to the plan with increasing focus, argued briefly about the chess set point, worked out the logic himself in approximately 90 seconds, and said, right, fine, but if anything comes back through that door that isn't you, I'm coming in anyway. Noted, Harry said. I mean it. I know you mean it. It's one of your best qualities. Harry looked at him. The chess set, can you get us through it? Ron straightened slightly. Yeah, he said, with the specific certainty of someone in their domain. Yeah, I can get us through it. They went at 11:30 with Harry's invisibility cloak, the real one, which had arrived in a package with no note in January and which Harry had identified immediately as a halo and filed under things Dumbledore wants me to have so that I'll use it in a way that serves his purposes, which doesn't mean I can't use it in a way that serves mine. They moved through the castle in the trained silence of Harry and the borrowed silence of Ron and Hermione following his lead, and the castle opened for them the way it had been opening for Harry since October, not magically, not dramatically, just with the quiet welcome of a very old place that has made a decision. The trapdoor was open. Quirrell had already gone through. Harry felt the open trapdoor before he saw it, the shift in the ambient field, the old ward structure breached at the entry point, and below it something that smelled of damp earth and the particular chemical signature of Devil's Snare. He went through first, dropped into the darkness below, and released a controlled light pulse from his hand, not a lumos, not wand magic, but the bioluminescent frequency he'd learned from the Atlantean panels, warm and directionless and sufficient. The devil's snare was there. It had Quirrel-shaped disturbance in it, crushed sections where he'd apparently panicked before remembering the light countermeasure, and Harry walked through the living plant with the calm of someone who has spent 4 years among ocean life that could kill you and learned that panic is the thing that makes it likely. The plant didn't touch him. It reached, then stilled, then moved aside. Harry had the vague impression it was confused. He took Ron and Hermione through. Hermione produced fire, compact, controlled, her wand worked precise and confident, and they passed through the snare into the next chamber. The keys were extraordinary. Hundreds of them, winged, filling the chamber with frantic silvery movement, and the broomstick in the corner waiting. Harry was on it before Ron finished reading the room, and the key, he felt it before he saw it, the slight wrongness of the one old key in a new key population, the counterfeited ware against manufactured ware, was in his hand in 11 seconds. He had the door open before Hermione had finished counting the keys. "How?" Ron said. "They move in a current," Harry said, off the broom. "The old one swims differently. Like a fish that's been in the water longer than the others." He pushed the door open. "Chess set next." Ron went through the door and saw the chess set and stood there for a moment in a silence that was a different quality from his usual silences. This was the silence of someone who has come home to something. He walked to the black side and looked at the board, and Harry watched his eyes move across it with the rapid assessment of someone for whom this visual information is native language. "White moves first," Ron said. "We take black pieces. We'll need to replace 3, the bishop, a knight, and the queen." He looked at the pieces beside the board, the ones presumably displaced from previous arrangement. "I'll take the knight. Harry, you're the bishop. Hermione, the second rook, far right." They moved through it. Harry trusted Ron completely in this space, and the trust was earned. Ron directed them with the quiet authority of someone who knows what they know, no hesitation, no second-guessing, the moves coming from something deeper than calculation. When his own turn came, when the White Queen's path crossed his position and there was nothing for it but the sacrifice, Ron looked at Harry and said, "This is it. When I'm down, you two go. The board will recognize the win." "Ron," Hermione started. "I'm not dying," Ron said patiently. "She'll knock me down. It'll hurt and I'll be annoyed about it, but I'm not dying." He looked at Harry. "Go get him." Harry went. He went alone from the chess chamber with the door closing behind him, and ahead the troll, unconscious already. Quirrell had dealt with it, which was in its way informative about what Quirrell was capable of when not performing panic, and then Snape's potions puzzle, 7 bottles on a table, a riddle in verse on a rolled parchment, and purple fire behind him and black ahead. Harry read the riddle once. He wasn't a logical puzzle person specifically, but Atlantean sigil work was fundamentally about reading systems, and the riddle was a system, a set of interlocking constraints with one solution. He found the solution in about 40 seconds, drank the forward bottle, it was ice cold, which he found refreshing, the hydrokinesis in him always responding warmly to cold water, and stepped through the black fire. The mirror room. Quirrell stood in front of the mirror of Eriste with his back to the door and his hands at his sides, and the posture of someone who has been standing in the same place for some time in increasing frustration. The mirror was large and ornate, and its inscription ran around the frame, the Eriste/desire reversal, the show/desire/heart phrase, and Harry felt it from 10 feet away, the intent-bound enchantment he'd identified from outside the door. Functional. Elegant. He appreciated the construction even in the middle of everything else. He also felt, at closer range, the Voldemort presence in Quirrell with a new clarity. The cold dark thing, parasitic, maintaining itself on the edge of a living body, and the quality of its desperation was acute, not Quirrell's desperation, the other one's, which was older and colder and had been building for 10 years in the absence of a body. "I wondered when you'd come," Quirrell said, without turning. "Did you?" Harry said. "Dumbledore hoped you would. He has a very tidy plan." Quirrell turned. His face was the face of a frightened man performing competence, and somewhere in those eyes the other thing looked out. Though I doubt you're here for Dumbledore's reasons. I'm not here for anyone's reasons, Harry said. I'm here because the stone shouldn't be in your hands. Quirrell looked at him, both of him, the man and the thing in the man, with the measuring attention of someone recalibrating. You've been told to expect me to be something terrible, Quirrell said. But look at you. 11 years old and you came here alone. Past everything. A pause. What are you, exactly? It was a genuine question. Harry recognized genuine questions. Something new, Harry said. What's in the mirror? Nothing, Quirrell said, with frustration that was too real to be performance. I see the stone. I reach for it. It isn't there. He looked back at the mirror. The enchantment is beyond me. I can see what I want but I cannot take it. He looked at Harry again. But you. The quality of his attention shifted. You don't want the stone. You don't want to use it. If you looked in the mirror, I know what I'd see, Harry said. Do you? Not the stone. Not power or wealth or anything that the stone represents. Harry moved into the room. He kept a specific distance, close enough to assess, far enough to move freely, and looked at the mirror without approaching it. I'd see my parents, he said. And I've already decided not to look. Because wanting things that aren't there is a trap and I don't have time for traps tonight. Quirrell was very still. Let me help you understand something, Harry said, and his voice had settled into the quality it got when he was very serious about something, not louder, not more formal, just cleaner, the way deep water is cleaner than surface water. Voldemort, the thing in you, behind your eyes, that you let in because it promised you something, it cannot have the stone. Not because Dumbledore's enchantments will stop it. Because I'm here, and I'm going to take the stone out of this room tonight, and none of what it has planned is going to happen. The silence in the room changed. Then Quirrell's voice changed. Not his voice, the other one's, coming through Quirrell's mouth, dropping the mimicry of the frightened professor and landing at something much colder and much older. Harry Potter, said Voldemort. Not Quirrell. Voldemort. The name carried in that voice was the name of a thing that had once been a person named Tom Riddle and had systematically unmade the human parts of itself in the pursuit of something it called immortality. Harry felt it, not fear, he'd promised himself that and he kept promises, but recognition. The soul fragment that Poseidon had taken from his forehead had been a piece of this thing, and even removed it left a kind of memory, the way a healed wound remembers its shape. Hello, Harry said. A pause. Whatever Voldemort had expected, terror, perhaps, or the desperate courage of a cornered child, he clearly had not expected this. You removed my Horcrux, Voldemort said, through Quirrell's mouth. Yes. Last summer. Poseidon removed it. Another pause, longer. Poseidon, Voldemort said. God of the sea. My father. Harry said it without inflection, just fact. I have two fathers. He's one of them. Arthur Curry, Aquaman, King of Atlantis, is the other. I've been living in Atlantis since I was 7. He watched Quirrell's face for the response, and what moved through it was not what he expected, it was not rage, not dismissal. It was genuine recalculation, the expression of a very intelligent mind encountering information that requires fundamental adjustment to the working model. Atlantis, Voldemort said, slowly. Yes. And Poseidon. Yes. Quirrell's hands moved, Voldemort reaching for something through the body he was wearing, and the spell that came was a proper one, a killing curse, green and absolute. Harry moved. Not dodged. The room wasn't large enough for a clean dodge, and dodging was the response of someone who was planning to stay defensive. He sidestepped the killing curse the way you sidestep a committed opponent in water combat, using the force's committed direction against itself, and while Voldemort was processing the miss, Harry was already at the mirror. He didn't look in it. He put his hand flat against its surface. He felt the enchantment structure immediately. Dumbledore's work, deep, nuanced, built with the layered patience of a great wizard. The intent binding was the central mechanism. The mirror gave the stone only to someone who wanted it but would not use it. Harry understood this completely. He also understood something about the enchantment that he doubted Dumbledore had fully thought through when he designed it, which was that the binding was magical, and the magic it recognized was wizarding magic. What Harry had was bigger than wizarding magic. And the mirror was, at its core, an object bound to a form of detection of want, of intent, of desire, and detection ran on the same basic principle as sensing. Harry was extremely good at sensing. He reached into the mirror's enchantment structure with the Atlantean sigil language, not breaking it, not cracking it, but reading it, the way you read a current to understand where it wants to go, and found the stone. It was there. Exactly where the enchantment put things for people who met its conditions. Harry met the conditions and then some. He not only didn't want to use the stone, he was actively here to prevent it from being used, which was about as far from self-interested desire as you could get. The stone settled into his palm. It was warm. Small, about the size of a large marble, deep red, and it pulsed with a stored energy that was ancient and specific and unlike any magical signature he'd encountered. He closed his hand around it. Quirrel spun. Another spell, this one physical, a binding charm, competently cast. Harry dissolved it. Not with a counter-curse, he didn't say anything. He just felt the magical structure in the binding charm and unraveled it the way you unravel a water current, finding the organizing tension and releasing it. The ropes fell apart. "What are you?" Quirrel started. "Stand back," Harry said, and his voice had the quality that Poseidon's voice sometimes had, not loud, but weighted, the sound of something saying precisely what it means and meaning it completely. Quirrel stood back. He did it automatically, before thinking about it, and Harry saw the moment he registered that he'd done it, the flicker of confusion in his eyes. Voldemort said, through Quirrel's mouth, "Give me the stone." "No," Harry said. "You cannot." "I can," Harry said. "And I won't. And I want to tell you something clearly, because you're intelligent enough to hear it and adjust your plans accordingly." He looked at Quirrel's face, at Voldemort behind it, with the direct, steady gaze he'd been developing since he was 7 years old, and a god had looked at him in a quarry and he'd looked back. "You are not going to win. Not this year, not through the approaches you're currently using. The Horcrux you had in me is gone. The stone is in my hand. The body you're inhabiting is failing, I can feel it from here, the host deterioration is advanced. You need to cut your losses." A silence. "You are 11 years old," Voldemort said. "Yes," Harry said. "And I have 2 divine fathers, 4 years of Atlantean military and academic training, Olympian storm magic, and the stone in my hand. You have a wizard with a failing body and plans that have not survived contact with this room." He paused. "Cut your losses." Quirrel lunged. Not Voldemort's choice, Quirrel's, the man's own desperation overriding whatever the thing in him was calculating. He lunged for Harry's hand, for the stone, and Harry caught him by the wrist. The effect was immediate. The blisters appeared on Quirrel's skin where Harry's hand touched, the burning, not from any intention on Harry's part, it was Lily's protection still, the love magic his mother had left in him that made his skin anathema to the thing wearing Quirrel, and Harry felt it happen and felt Quirrel's genuine pain and felt deeply, specifically sorry for Quirrel who had made terrible choices from a place of ambition and fear and was now burning because of what he'd let in. He held on anyway. Not cruelly. Not longer than necessary. He held on for exactly the time it took to make the next thing happen, which was this. He reached into the Quirrel shape with the same sensing faculty he'd used on the mirror, and he found Voldemort's presence inside Quirrel the way Poseidon had found the soul fragment inside him, not with force, but with the absolute certainty of something that knows exactly what doesn't belong, and he pushed. Not destroyed. Not killed. He was 11 and he was powerful and he was not going to kill anything tonight if he could avoid it, not even the thing in the man, because killing was a permanent solution to a temporary strategic problem, and Poseidon had taught him that the ocean did not destroy, it dispersed. He dispersed Voldemort's hold on Quirrell. The connection that Voldemort maintained inside the host body, the parasitic link that let him ride the professor, speak through him, use his hands, Harry found it and he pushed it apart the way you push apart a current junction, redirecting each tributary away from the central meeting point. It was delicate work, finer than anything he'd done before, and he used the Atlantean sigil precision that Poseidon had spent months developing in him, the wand-like accuracy threaded through his bare hands. Quirrell screamed. Voldemort, the not quite there, not quite gone presence, made a sound that was not a scream because it had no body to scream with, a pressure change, a cold wave that pushed through the room and rocked the mirror on its base and blew the torches out. In the dark, Harry felt Voldemort leave. Not dead. Not destroyed. Dispersed, smoke without a vessel, driven out into the castle's air and then out through the stone, out into the night, away. Still existing, still coherent at some fundamental level, but without purchase, without a host, without the stone. The torches came back when Harry released a light pulse. Quirrell was on the floor. Not dead, Harry checked that first, deliberately and methodically, breathing, unconscious, the blistered hands folded at odd angles. His turban had come unwound and the back of his head was just, the back of a head, scarred, damaged at the base of the skull where the possession had focused, but a head. Just one person again. Harry stood in the mirror room with the stone in his hand and the dispersed remnant of Voldemort in the castle's air, already thinning, already moving away. He looked at the mirror. He looked at himself in it. He saw his parents. Just briefly, James and Lily, standing together, and the image was not what he'd expected because it was not grief-shaped, not longing-shaped, not the ache of absence. It was something quieter. Recognition. His mother's eyes, which McGonagall had told him he had. His father's, James's, expression, which was something between pride and amusement, which Harry thought was probably accurate to the person he'd been. He looked at them for 3 seconds. Then he turned away, because he was not here to want things, and he had the stone in his hand and Quirrell on the floor and a very specific next set of things to do. He went back through the black fire. The potion room, the troll, still unconscious, unrelated to Quirrell's confrontation, the chess chamber. He pushed the door open and the first thing he saw was Ron, sitting up against the chamber wall with a bloody nose and an expression of profound relief. "You've got it," Ron said immediately, looking at Harry's closed fist. "Yes." "And Quirrell?" "Alive. Unconscious. Voldemort's gone, not dead, but gone from Quirrell. He'll need medical attention." Harry crouched next to Ron. "Your nose. Queen got me on the way down. It's fine. I've had worse from Fred." Ron looked at Harry's hand. "Is that actually can I see it?" Harry opened his hand. The stone sat in his palm, deep red, warm, pulsing with the slow energy of something that had been doing its particular work for centuries. Ron stared at it. "Bloody hell," he said, with the reverence of someone encountering confirmed legend. "Where's Hermione?" "Here," Hermione said, appearing from around the chess table where she'd been collecting pieces Ron had indicated as significant. She looked at Harry, at his closed fist, at Ron's nose, and processed all of it in approximately 2 seconds. "You got it." "Yes." "And Quirrell?" "Unconscious in the mirror room. Voldemort's no longer in him." Harry stood. "We need to get Ron to the hospital wing and I need to see Dumbledore." Hermione looked at his face carefully. "How are you?" she asked, and meant it as a real question, not a formality. Harry checked, the habit she'd accidentally given him, by asking it seriously enough that it required a real answer. He was fine, genuinely. Not the defensive fine of someone managing something difficult. He was tired, with the clean tired of significant effort, and his right hand had a mild burn from Lily's protection discharging against Quirrel's skin, and he was thinking about Quirrel on the floor with his damaged head and feeling the specific sorrow he felt for people who had made bad choices from understandable places. "I'm all right," he said. "Let's go." They got Ron up. He was steady on his feet. The nose was truly just a nose. Ron assessed his own injuries with the practical accuracy of someone who had grown up with Fred and George, and went back through the devil's snare and up through the trapdoor and into the third-floor corridor. Dumbledore was waiting. He was standing in the corridor with his hands folded in his robes and his half-moon glasses and his expression of someone who is very good at appearing unsurprised. He looked at the three of them, Ron's nose, Hermione's expression, Harry's closed fist, and his eyes moved to Harry's hand with the specific attention of a man who had built a very elaborate trap and is wondering exactly how the animal walked through it. "Harry," he said. "I believe explanations are in order." "Yes," Harry said. "They are." He opened his hand. The stone sat in his palm and Dumbledore looked at it and something moved behind his eyes that was too quick and too controlled to read fully. "Quirrell is in the mirror room. He needs medical attention. Voldemort is no longer in him." I dispersed the connection. Dumbledore was very still. "You dispersed the, how did you? You should send someone for Quirrell first," Harry said. "The medical conversation takes priority over the how conversation." Another flicker behind the glasses. Dumbledore raised his wand and sent a Patronus in the direction of the hospital wing, a silver bird, elegant, moving fast, and then lowered his wand and looked at Harry with the full weight of his attention, which was considerable. Harry had felt legilimency probes from him 4 or 5 times since September, each one turned away at the boundary of Harry's shields without fuss, and he felt another one now, the gentle but very skilled pressure of someone trying to read what was behind the composure. He closed his mind and held Dumbledore's gaze without blinking. "You should take Ron and Hermione to the hospital wing," Harry said, to Hermione. "I'll stay." Hermione hesitated. "Harry, I'll be fine," he said, and this time he said it the defensive way, slightly, because he was about to have a conversation he preferred not to have an audience for, not for his sake but for Dumbledore's. The old wizard deserved that much. Hermione took Ron's arm and they went. Ron looked back once with the expression of someone who wants to stay and is choosing, with considerable effort, to trust. Harry waited until they were gone. Then he looked at Dumbledore. "You left," Harry said. "Today. You left the castle knowing that Quirrell would move tonight." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "I received urgent information," he said. "You went because Quirrell's timeline was ready and you wanted the gauntlet run." Harry said it without accusation, not because he wasn't certain, but because accusation was for people who wanted emotional resolution rather than actual understanding. "You've been waiting for me to go down there." Dumbledore looked at him. Then, slowly, with the specific grace of a man who is very rarely caught being exactly what he is, he inclined his head. "I had hoped," he said, "that you would go." "Yes. Though I confess the means by which you succeeded were," he looked at Harry's hand. "Not what I anticipated." "You anticipated me getting the stone from the mirror," Harry said. "Because I'd want to find it but not use it. Lily's protection plus the mirror's mechanism." "Yes. And then what?" "I'd wait for you to arrive. Or Voldemort would try to take it from me and Lily's protection would." "The protection is significant," Dumbledore said, carefully. "I know. It burned Quirrell through his skin. I used it deliberately." Harry paused. "But you had a plan past the stone, didn't you? Something about the Horcrux, the piece of Voldemort in my scar. You expected it to activate when Voldemort made contact. You expected," he stopped. "Because the conclusion was there, fully formed, in the way that conclusions arrive when you have all the pieces and the last one clicks into place. Dumbledore's plan wasn't just for the stone. It was for the Horcrux in Harry's scar. The confrontation, the activation, the eventual, not tonight, but someday, sacrifice of the vessel so the Horcrux could be destroyed." He looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at him. And what was in Dumbledore's face was not the expression of a villain, not calculation or cruelty. It was something much more painful, the expression of a man who has made a decision that he believes is necessary and is carrying the weight of it with the genuine grief of someone who understands what it costs and has decided that the cost is worth paying. He believed it. Harry could see that clearly. He genuinely, fully believed that the path he'd laid, the prepared sacrifice, the boy who must die, was the right one, the only one, and he believed it with the sincere conviction of a very good man who has looked at a terrible problem for years and concluded that the terrible solution is the only solution. The Horcrux is gone, Harry said, quietly. Dumbledore went completely still. Poseidon removed it last summer, Harry said. Before I came to Hogwarts. It's been gone for nearly a year. He held Dumbledore's gaze. Whatever plan you had that required it, whatever you thought was going to happen to me down the road, it doesn't work anymore. The piece of Voldemort that was in my scar is dispersed. It's been dispersed for months. The silence in the corridor was profound. What moved through Dumbledore's face was something Harry would never describe to anyone, not because it was frightening but because it was private, the face of a very old man discovering that a weight he'd been carrying for 10 years, a terrible weight, a weight he'd built his entire strategy around and made peace with carrying, has shifted into a different configuration entirely. Grief and relief and recalculation in something that might have been, under everything else, a feeling very close to hope. A god, Dumbledore said, finally, very quietly. Yes. Poseidon. He tested the word with the tone of someone encountering it as a real fact rather than a mythological reference for the first time. Yes. Another long silence. Then Dumbledore said, I have been, operating with incomplete information. Yes, Harry said. You have. He closed his fingers around the stone again. Here's what I'd like you to understand. I came to Hogwarts because I chose to. I'll stay because I'm choosing to. I'm not a piece, Professor. I'm not on anyone's board. Not Voldemort's, not yours. He paused. I know you've been planning for a very long time and I know you believe your plans are good and I genuinely think, that most of your intentions are good. But planning around me without talking to me is going to produce worse outcomes than working with me, and I think on some level you know that. He held out the stone. This should go back to Flamel. Not be kept here. Dumbledore took the stone. He took it carefully, the way you take something precious, and looked at it for a moment with an expression that contained the entire history of why this object mattered, Flamel's centuries, Perenelle's centuries, the thing they'd chosen and the cost of it, and then he closed his own hand around it. I owe you, Dumbledore said, a very different conversation than the ones we've been having. Yes, Harry said. You do. Will you, permit an old man to start again? The phrasing was deliberate, Harry thought. The word permit. Dumbledore had not asked permission for things in a very long time. Yes, Harry said. Tomorrow. Tonight I want to sleep. The corner of Dumbledore's mouth moved, genuine, small, the reflex of a man who has just had the conversational equivalent of a door opened in a wall he thought was solid. Of course, he said. The hospital wing first, I think, for that hand. Harry looked at his right hand. The burn from Quirrel's skin was not severe but it was real, blistering slightly at the palm. Madame Pomfrey is going to have a lot of questions. She always does, Dumbledore said. She is remarkably good at not asking them. He began moving down the corridor and Harry walked beside him, and the old castle held both of them in its stone, the boy who was something new and the old man who had just started over. They found Ron in the hospital wing being fussed over by Madame Pomfrey for his nose and enjoying it with the total shamelessness of someone who had earned medical attention and was going to get his money's worth. Hermione was in the chair next to his bed with a book she was reading and also monitoring him for signs of additional injury. When Harry came through the door both of them looked up, and what was in their faces, both of them, independently, in the same moment, was the same thing, relief, and warmth, and the particular expression of people who have decided, over the course of a year, that someone is important to them and are not embarrassed by the decision. "Sit down," Hermione said, looking at his hand. "Madame Pomfrey is going to want to see that." Harry sat down. The hospital wing was warm with the specific warmth of a place used for healing, and outside the windows Scotland was dark and cold, the lake catching starlight, deep and old and carrying its currents far below. Harry put his unburned hand flat on the bed, not thinking about anything, and felt the distant pulse of the Atlantic through the water table beneath the castle's foundations. Still there. Still listening. "So," Ron said, from his pillow, nose already considerably improved, "are you going to tell me what happened or are you going to make me guess?" "Because I have some very creative guesses." Harry looked at his two best friends in the world, one reading and worrying simultaneously, one eating grapes from a bowl on the bedside table with the comfortable authority of a patient, and felt something settle, warm and straightforward and real. "It worked out," he said. "How much of it worked out?" Hermione asked. "All of it," Harry said. Ron raised a grape in toast. "Obviously," he said, with the absolute confidence of someone who had never doubted it. Outside, the last traces of Voldemort's dispersed presence thinned in the Scottish air and blew south on the prevailing wind, and in the Atlantic 300 miles away something in the deep water recognized the change and settled, and the currents ran on. Chapter 6, Two Fathers, One Crown. The morning after was a Thursday, which felt wrong. World-altering nights should be followed by something more significant than a Thursday, a weekend at minimum, Harry thought, or a nationally declared day of something. Instead he woke up in the hospital wing to Madame Pomfrey checking his hand with the brisk efficiency of someone who had been asked no questions about the night before and was expressing her feelings about that through the vigor of her medical examination. His hand was mostly healed. The blistering had gone down overnight under whatever Pomfrey had applied, leaving skin that was pink and slightly tender but functional. She prodded it twice, declared it acceptable, and left without meeting his eyes, which meant she'd been told enough to know she hadn't been told everything and had made her peace with this arrangement. Ron was still asleep. He'd been given a mild sleeping draught at 2 in the morning when Pomfrey had decided his body language suggested someone trying to stay awake through stubbornness rather than necessity, and he was making the most of it with the commitment of someone who takes sleep seriously. Hermione was sitting in the same chair she'd been in when Harry arrived last night, book in lap, hair doing its morning things, and she had clearly not slept at all. "You should have gone to bed," Harry said. "I was reading," she said, without looking up. "You've been reading since 11 last night. It's a good book." "What's it about?" A pause. "I've read the same page 14 times, she admitted. Harry sat up and swung his legs off the bed. "Go back to the tower and sleep. I'll be here when you wake up." Hermione closed the book and looked at him with the expression of someone choosing between pride and pragmatism. Pragmatism won, which it usually did with Hermione when she was tired enough to be honest. "You're sure you're all right," she said. "I'm sure." He meant it. He'd run a full internal check before Pomfrey arrived, the trained self-assessment, the whole system scan, and everything was clear, everything settled, the slight residue of last night's effort already absorbed and processed the way hard training was absorbed. "Go sleep. When you wake up there will probably be institutional chaos and you'll want to be rested for it." The corner of her mouth moved. "That's almost certainly accurate." She stood, gathered her book, looked at Ron's sleeping form with something that she absolutely did not call fondness, and went. Harry sat in the quiet hospital wing and watched the morning develop through the windows, Scottish May, grey-gold, the lake catching early light in the fractured way of still water in low sun. He felt the lake doing its old patient thing, the currents reading the temperature differential between deep cold and warming surface, and below that, faintly, the pulse of deeper water. He was thinking about Dumbledore. About the conversation in the corridor, about the expression on the old man's face when he understood the Horcrux was gone. About the plan that had been running for 10 years that now had a structural gap in it the size of everything. He was also thinking about what came next, which was the conversation he'd promised Dumbledore and hadn't had yet, and the conversation he hadn't had with Arthur and Poseidon, and the specific thing he'd decided, not last night, but sometime in March, when he'd been sitting in the Gryffindor common room watching the fire and thinking about the shape of what he wanted his life to look like, about how this year ended. Ron woke up at 9 with the abrupt fully conscious emergence of someone whose body had decided it was done sleeping whether the brain was ready or not. He sat up, registered Harry on the next bed, registered the morning, registered the absence of Hermione, and said, "Did it actually happen or did I dream it?" "It happened," Harry said. Ron was quiet for a moment, processing. "Then, tell me everything." "I was in the chess room for most of it." Harry told him. He told it straight, without drama, the way he told everything: the mirror, the stone, Quirrell and Voldemort, the dispersal, Dumbledore in the corridor. Ron listened with the focused attention of someone taking notes in his head, occasionally interrupting with the precise questions of a tactically minded person filling gaps in a spatial picture. When Harry got to the part about Dumbledore and the Horcrux plan, Ron went quiet in a different way. "So he was going to," Ron started. "Eventually. Not now. But it was in the plan." Ron stopped. His jaw was set in the way Harry recognized as Ron working through something that made him angry and trying to decide if the anger was useful before expressing it. "He's supposed to be the good one." "He is the good one," Harry said. "That's what makes it complicated." He looked at a terrible problem and found what he genuinely believed was the only solution, and he made peace with it because he thought he had to. Harry looked at the window. "I'm not forgiving it. I'm just describing it accurately." Ron thought about this for a long moment. "What are you going to do?" "Talk to him. Today, probably. Get it all on the table." Harry stood and stretched, feeling the clean stiffness of a body that had done significant work and rested well. "He needs to understand what I am and what that means going forward. Not so he's afraid of me, so we can actually work together instead of him trying to arrange me like furniture." Ron snorted. "Furniture," he said. "You." He seemed to find this funny in the specific way of imagining the exact scale of miscalculation involved. "Get dressed," Harry said. "Pomfrey will release you at 10 and I want breakfast." "Now you're talking," Ron said, and threw off the covers with the enthusiasm of someone for whom food is always a sufficient motivation. Dumbledore's office was at the top of a spiral staircase behind a gargoyle that required a password, Sherbet Lemon, which Harry had found out from McGonagall with minimal effort, McGonagall having apparently decided after the flying lesson that Harry was going to need direct access to most things sooner or later, and the office itself was one of the more interesting rooms in the castle. Harry had expected grandeur. What he found was something more honest, accumulated decades of a specific person's life expressed in objects and organized with the particular ordered chaos of someone who thinks in multiple directions at once. Portraits of previous headmasters dozing in frames. Instruments making small sounds and movements that suggested ongoing monitoring of various things. Fawkes the Phoenix on a perch, currently in the ugly chick phase of his cycle, watching Harry with bright knowing eyes that were considerably more intelligent than the body currently suggested. Dumbledore was at his desk. He looked like he hadn't slept, which Harry noted without judgment. He understood the shape of a night spent recalibrating. "Harry," he said. "Sit down." Harry sat. Fawkes made a sound. Dumbledore reached out one hand and the phoenix stepped onto his wrist without looking away from Harry, and Harry looked back at the bird with the same attention he gave to all creatures that looked at him with genuine intelligence. "I owe you the beginning of a different conversation," Dumbledore said. "You do," Harry agreed. "But I also want to be honest about why I'm here, because I think honest is more useful than strategic right now." He settled into the chair. "I'm not here to negotiate. I'm not here because I need something from you. I'm here because this is my world too, my mother's world, and I want to understand it and function in it without the two of us working against each other." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. "You are," he said, "not what I expected." "I know. What did you expect?" "A boy," Dumbledore said, simply. "Traumatized, resilient, burdened." "Good, I always expected you to be good, but young." shaped by deprivation in ways that would be painful and useful in equal measure. He folded his hands on the desk. Instead, I find someone who is already formed. Complete. In a way that has nothing to do with deprivation and everything to do with being extraordinarily well taught. I had good fathers, Harry said, and the word was easy and true in his mouth. Tell me about them, Dumbledore said. Not strategic, genuinely curious, the curiosity of a very old man who has been the most informed person in every room he's entered for decades, encountering a subject he knows almost nothing about. So Harry told him. Not everything, not the personal things, not the quarry in as much detail as it held, not the specific texture of Poseidon sitting on his bedroom floor or Mara writing a letter she said she wasn't going to write. But the shape of it, Atlantis, the training, what the ocean had made him, what Poseidon had added, what Arthur had given him simply by being the kind of man who looked at a 7-year-old in a quarry and didn't look away from what he saw. Dumbledore listened without interrupting. It was, Harry thought, one of the most complete listeners he'd ever spoken to. The attention was total, not just polite. The portraits behind him had woken up, one by one, and were listening too. The Horcruxes, Dumbledore said, when Harry stopped. Voldemort has others. The one in your scar was not the only one. I know, Harry said. I've been reading. He paused. How many? 6, I believe. Possibly 7 if he succeeded in an attempt, I suspect. Dumbledore looked at him steadily. This is the real war, Harry. Not last night was a battle. The real war is the Horcruxes. Each one destroyed brings him closer to being mortal again, to being something that can be permanently stopped. And the prophecy, Harry said. Dumbledore was still. I know about the prophecy, Harry said. I've known for months. Trelawney is not subtle about her significant moments, and the castle records aren't restricted to staff. He looked at Dumbledore directly. Neither of us can live while the other survives. I understand what that means. I understand that it points at me as the one who ends it. He paused. I'm all right with that. Not because I'm willing to die, I'm not, I intend to survive this war comprehensively, but because being the one who ends Voldemort is an accurate description of what I'm capable of and what I'm willing to do. Something in Dumbledore's face eased. It wasn't visible exactly, but Harry felt it, the release of a tension that had been held a very long time. What I need from you, Harry continued, is information. Not managed information, not the information you decide I'm ready for, actual information, as it becomes available. The Horcruxes. Voldemort's history. Everything you know about what he made and where it is. He paused. And I need you to stop making plans that require things to happen to me without my knowledge. That, Dumbledore said, slowly, is a fair request. It's not a request, Harry said, pleasantly. It's a condition. Dumbledore looked at him. Then, very slowly, the smile came, real, large, the smile of a very old man encountering something that genuinely delights him. Arthur Curry and Poseidon, he said. Both of them. Both of them, Harry confirmed. And you want, what, exactly, from Hogwarts? From this world? To learn it, Harry said. My mother's magic. Wandwork, the British magical tradition, what this civilization has built in 1,000 years of practice. I'm here for all of it. He looked around the office, at the portraits and the instruments and Fawkes, who had fallen asleep on Dumbledore's wrist. And to finish what Voldemort started in my family. On my terms and in my time. Dumbledore nodded, slowly, the long thoughtful nod of someone making a decision that feels right. Then let us, he said, begin again. Word spread through Hogwarts the way words spread through small enclosed communities, with extraordinary speed and significant embellishment. By lunch the story of the previous night had acquired Harry single-handedly defeating 100 trolls, but what held constant through all versions was the core truth. Harry Potter had gone into the 3rd floor, dealt with Quirrell, and come back with the stone. The embellishments didn't bother Harry. The core truth was sufficient. What did interest him was the response of the various populations of the school. The Gryffindors were celebratory in the uncomplicated way of people who've decided someone is one of theirs and are proud accordingly. Ron had told the common room an accurate version. He was honest about the chess, genuinely, which Harry appreciated, and the accurate version was still plenty. The Ravenclaws sent Hermione 3 questions before noon, all variants of but how exactly did the hydrokinesis work on a mountain troll, and she was visibly pleased to have been identified as the person to ask. The Hufflepuffs, who Harry had been slightly worried about because the politics of the school suggested that Hufflepuff was the house most likely to have processed the year as an outsider watching insiders have adventures, sent Neville to say that it was brilliant and that the thing Harry had done in Madame Hooch's class with the broom had been their house's favorite topic for the last 2 months. Neville delivered this with the particular sincerity of someone who is carrying someone else's message and also personally means it. The Slytherins were more complex. Malfoy found Harry in the library after lunch. Not in the aggressive way of the early year, not with Crabbe and Goyle as furniture, alone, which was itself significant. He sat across from Harry at the table where Harry was reading and didn't say anything for a moment. Harry waited. "Quirrell," Malfoy said finally. It was actually you know who. "Yes," Harry said. "In the castle. All year." "Yes." Malfoy processed this. He was doing the thing Harry had noticed from their first confrontation, the rapid reassessment, the working through, the way really intelligent people look when their model of the world is being updated and they're trying to figure out if the new information is threatening or useful. "My father," he said, slowly, supported him. "You know who." Before he disappeared." "I know," Harry said. "So." Malfoy looked at the table. "If he comes back properly, when he comes back properly," Harry corrected. "He's not done." Malfoy looked up. "He lost last night but he's not gone," Harry said. "He'll try to get a body again. He'll rebuild. The Horcruxes mean he can't die the normal way." He watched Malfoy take this in, watched the implications move through those sharp grey eyes. "Your father will probably be expected to support him again." Malfoy was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Harry added nothing and simply let the quiet be. "What you said," Malfoy said finally. "In September. About talking to you as myself." "Yes. I don't know what that looks like," Malfoy said, and it was the most honest thing Harry had heard from him. The specific honesty of someone admitting a gap in their capabilities rather than pretending the gap isn't there. "It looks like this," Harry said. "Right now. You came here without backup and said true things." He looked at Malfoy steadily. "That's the starting point." Malfoy looked at him for a moment. There was a calculation happening that Harry wasn't privy to, something long and personal and not fully resolved, and then Malfoy said, "The hydrokinesis. The water magic." He paused. "Can it be learned? By someone without the bloodline?" "Different traditions," Harry said. "Atlantean water manipulation has a learnable framework, it's technical, it's trainable, it doesn't require specific bloodline the way some Olympian aspects do. What I do is amplified by my lineage but the foundational techniques are teachable." He watched Malfoy. "Why?" "I want to be prepared," Malfoy said. "For what's coming. I don't want to be on the wrong side of it because my father decided before I was born which side I'd be on." It was, Harry thought, probably the bravest thing Draco Malfoy had said in his 11 years. Not heroic brave, not charging into danger brave, but the quiet brave of someone looking at the shape of their own life and deciding to ask a different question than the one they were handed. "Come to the lake on Saturday morning," Harry said. 6 o'clock. "Bring your wand but you won't need it." Malfoy looked briefly stunned that this had worked. He recovered quickly. 6 o'clock is early. "The water's clearer before breakfast," Harry said, and returned to his book. Malfoy left, and Harry noted, without looking up, that his footsteps had a different quality than the ones that had entered the library. The owls arrived on Friday. Two of them simultaneously, which was both typical and somehow perfectly calibrated, an enormous seahawk that was definitely not a normal owl and that had clearly traveled a significant distance in no significant time, Arthur's, and a second presence that didn't involve an owl at all but announced itself through the window's glass beginning to fog from the outside in a pattern that looked like script. The Seahawk landed on the windowsill of Harry's dormitory and extended its leg with the bearing of something that had been given important cargo and knew it. The note attached was in Arthur's handwriting, which was large and slightly impatient. Harry, the castle's alert system sent a notification to Atlantis at 11:17 last night, Mara's early warning network, don't ask. We know something happened. Mara wants details. I want to know you're all right. Poseidon will contact you separately. Write back or I'm coming there. Arthur. The foggy pattern on the window had resolved itself into 3 words, well done. Harry looked at the 3 words for a moment. He knew Poseidon well enough to know that well done from Poseidon was a sentence that contained roughly 40 things that Poseidon had decided not to say because he'd decided Harry didn't need them said and that the 3 words themselves were a more complete expression of everything than any paragraph would be. He appreciated the economy of it enormously. He wrote back to Arthur, detailed, honest, the full sequence, knowing that Arthur would read it to Mara and she would have opinions about the tactical choices that he was already looking forward to hearing. He finished with, I'm fine. Both hands working. The burn was mild. Don't come, yet. I want to finish the term properly. But soon. He added a postscript, tell Mara the chess set was Ron's. She'll appreciate that the right person did the right part. He sent it with the Seahawk and watched it go south from the dormitory window, and then looked at the 3 words still on the glass and pressed his palm against them briefly. The cold of the glass was ordinary glass cold, nothing deeper. But the ocean was always there if you knew how to feel for it. Exams, which the rest of the first year experienced as a significant tribulation, were for Harry a comfortable exercise in translating what he knew into the format expected. He was careful about this, not to suppress what he knew, but to demonstrate it in terms the examiners could evaluate, which was different from hiding it and required its own specific skill. Hermione, who had studied furiously and correctly, performed brilliantly. Ron, who had studied in the specific way of someone who has learned to calibrate exactly how much studying is sufficient, performed solidly. Harry's charms practical produced a feather that didn't just levitate but maintained a stable orbit at head height, which Professor Flitwick assessed with the expression of someone trying very hard to grade on the established rubric while also watching something considerably more interesting than the rubric covered. His transfiguration produced a perfect transformation on the first attempt and 2 subsequent variations that McGonagall had not asked for and that demonstrated the underlying mechanical principle of the transformation more thoroughly than the assignment required. McGonagall wrote a note in her grade book that was longer than the space provided. His potions practical, Snape invigilating with the specific attention of someone who has had their model of a student adjusted twice already and is watching for a 3rd adjustment, produced a potion that was, by the standard measurement criteria, indistinguishable from perfect, and a secondary product from the waste materials that was not a part of the assignment and that Snape quietly collected after the session for purposes he didn't explain. Harry didn't make a production of any of it. He just did the work. The end-of-year feast was on the last Friday in June and the house point situation had been, by that point, a subject of significant discussion. Gryffindor was in 3rd place until the feast, when Dumbledore stood and adjusted points in a way that was simultaneously generous and slightly theatrical and put Gryffindor first, which produced the appropriate response from the appropriate tables. Harry accepted his portion of the house victory with the warm uncomplicated pleasure of someone who is glad to be part of something without needing to be the center of it. He sat between Ron and Hermione and ate too much and listened to the noise of 600 students celebrating the end of the year and thought about Hogwarts, the castle, the lake, the corridors that opened for him, the portraits that had started nodding when he passed, the old magic of the place absorbed into his bones over the course of a year. He loved it. Not the way he loved the Atlantic, nothing was like that, but genuinely and specifically, as its own thing. His mother's world, and his. Neville was given 10 points at the feast and practically levitated out of his chair with the force of the response from his table, and Harry, watching, felt the specific pleasure of seeing someone receive something they've earned from a place of genuine surprise. He leaned across Ron to say, "Deserved," to Neville, and Neville's expression for the remainder of the feast suggested these were the most important 2 syllables he'd heard all year. The morning the express left, Harry stood on the platform at Hogsmeade and felt the approach. He felt it in the water table first, a vast displacement, something enormous moving through the groundwater network from the west, from the direction of the Atlantic, and then above ground, in the quality of the morning air, a pressure shift, the leading edge of a weather system that was not a natural weather system. He saw the look on Ron's face when Ron noticed the sky changing. "Harry," Ron said, slowly, looking west. "What is that?" "My father's," Harry said. Hermione looked up from her book. Then she looked west. The clouds had taken on the specific formation that Harry recognized from his training sessions, the organized rotation of something deliberately shaped rather than atmospherically generated, and below the clouds, moving toward Hogsmeade at altitude, 2 figures. One was riding a column of water that had no business being in the Scottish air 30 miles from the nearest significant body of it, moving with the relaxed authority of someone for whom physics was a set of suggestions rather than laws. The other was simply flying, no visible support, moving through the Scottish morning with the specific ease of someone to whom this was entirely routine. Harry watched them come in. Arthur landed first, not dramatically, he just stopped being in the air and started being on the ground, and looked at Harry with the expression that Harry had carried with him since the quarry, the uncomplicated profound version that Arthur sometimes forgot to contain. He crossed the platform and put one hand on Harry's shoulder and looked at him the way you look at something you want to confirm is real and in good condition. "Hands healed," Harry said. "Good," Arthur said. "Then, you didn't write fast enough." "I wrote the next morning." Mara counted the hours. "Mara always counts the hours," Harry said, with a warmth that was completely genuine. Arthur's expression shifted, still the warmth, but adding something, the particular expression of someone about to say something they've been working up to. He said, "She sent a second letter. For you." He produced it. Atlantean paper, waterproof, the precise handwriting. Harry opened it. "You redirected a North Atlantic storm system at age 10 and I knew then that this was not going to be simple. I did not expect you to redirect a Dark Lord at age 11. I am adjusting my expectations upward permanently. Come home soon. The eels have been unreasonable in your absence. Mara. P.S. The Malfoy boy. I read about the Malfoys in the briefing files. Be careful with that one, not because he's dangerous but because he's at an age and a crossroads where the wrong kind of careful from you becomes the wrong kind of direction from him. You know this. I know you know this. I'm saying it anyway because that is what I do." Harry folded it against his chest. Poseidon landed differently, not because he was more theatrical but because he was fundamentally something different than Arthur and the landing expressed that. He stepped out of the air onto the platform the way water steps from one vessel to another, continuous, inevitable, without acknowledging the transition as significant. The Hogsmeade platform had not been a quiet place. 100 students waiting for the express, families beginning to arrive, Hagrid enormous and cheerful directing things, and Poseidon's arrival did what Poseidon's presence always did, which was create a radius of instinctive awareness in everyone nearby. People didn't flee. They just became very conscious of where he was without deciding to become conscious of it. Poseidon looked at Harry. Harry looked at Poseidon. "The dispersal technique," Poseidon said, without preamble. "Yes," Harry said. "You developed that in the moment. I used the sensing work you taught me. The same principle as removing the Horcrux, finding what doesn't belong and redirecting it away from the point of attachment." Poseidon was quiet for a moment. He did the thing Harry had been watching for 4 years, the internal calculation, the thing Poseidon processed behind his expression before his expression did anything, and what came out was not the near smile, not the small dry thing. It was a real smile. Not enormous. Not theatrical. Poseidon didn't do theatrical, he did wait, and the weight of a real smile from the god of the sea was something that settled over Harry like deep water, like the thermal warmth at the bottom of the trench on the day they'd removed the Horcrux, like everything that had been being built for 4 years arriving at a specific moment and resting there. Good, Poseidon said. And then, which was rarer and which Harry would remember for the rest of his life, I am proud of you. Ron was standing 6 feet away and he had forgotten entirely about the train. He was watching Poseidon with the expression of someone whose category system has been genuinely overwhelmed. Arthur had noticed this and was quietly amused. Is that, Ron said to Harry, in a voice that was trying to be quiet and was mostly loud. Yes, Harry said. He's a, yes. An actual, Ron. Right, Ron said. Right. Okay. He looked at Arthur. And you're actually, King of Atlantis, yes, Arthur said pleasantly. You're Ronald Weasley. You know my name, Ron said, with an expression that suggested this was going to be something he thought about for quite some time. Harry talks about you. Frequently and well. Arthur looked at Hermione. Hermione Granger. The research. The chess set plan, smart. Hermione, who had been maintaining composure through the whole arrival with the precise control of someone who has decided she is not going to be visibly starstruck by anything, said, the research was an ongoing project, not a single insight. Then she looked at Harry and said, your father is Arthur Curry. Yes, Harry said. Aquaman. Yes. King of Atlantis. Yes. And Poseidon is, also yes, Harry said. Hermione looked at the sky, then at the ground, then at her book, then at Harry, with the expression of someone updating their entire model of reality from the inside out. I have so many questions, she said, which was what she'd said in the bathroom with the troll, and Harry thought it was probably going to be a constant feature of knowing him. I know, he said. You should come to Atlantis this summer. She stared at him. Both of you, Harry said, looking at Ron too. Ron opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Your home, he said. Is Atlantis? Yes. 2 miles underwater in the Atlantic. About 2 miles, yes. And you're inviting us. Your parents would need to agree. Arthur can, my mum would agree before he finished the sentence, Ron said. She'd probably pack for me before I got off the phone. Arthur looked at Harry over Ron's head with the expression of someone who has just understood something about his son that makes complete and total sense. Dumbledore appeared. He had walked from the direction of the school, Harry had felt him coming, the old ward signature, the specific magical weight of a wizard who had been at the top of every room for 80 years. He came with McGonagall, who had apparently decided to accompany him with the bearing of someone who has not decided whether this situation requires her presence but is erring on the side of yes. Dumbledore stopped at the edge of the platform. He looked at Poseidon. He looked at Arthur. He looked at Harry, who was standing between them with the comfortable ease of someone standing in a place they occupy fully. And Albus Dumbledore, who had not been visibly stunned by anything in a very long time, was visibly stunned. Not afraid. Not exactly. But whatever category he'd had for the scope of what Harry Potter is had just been replaced with a larger category, and the replacement was showing on his face with the specific expression of a man who is, despite himself, genuinely awed. McGonagall's expression was different. McGonagall looked at the 2 men on either side of Harry and then at Harry, and what moved through her face was the expression Harry associated with the moments she felt things she didn't perform, real, quick, and warm. Arthur stepped forward first because Arthur was always the one who stepped forward. He extended a hand to Dumbledore with the directness of someone who doesn't do posturing but does due respect, conditionally. Albus Dumbledore, he said. Arthur Curry. Dumbledore shook his hand. He looked at Poseidon, who had not moved and was not going to move to initiate a handshake because he was Poseidon and handshakes were a relatively recent development on the geological timescale. Lord Poseidon, Dumbledore said, with the incline of his head that he'd clearly selected after calculating what degree of deference was appropriate and deciding on something that was respectful without being sycophantic. Dumbledore, Poseidon said. Not dismissive. Just the specific economy of someone who uses words only when they contribute. A silence. Then Dumbledore said, to Arthur and Poseidon equally, what you have made of him is extraordinary. He paused, and the pause had weight. I owe you both a significant acknowledgement. I had plans for Harry that did not account for what he is. I intend to correct that. Arthur looked at Dumbledore steadily. Mara sent me a full briefing on your plans, he said. All of them. The emphasis was light but specific. I have opinions. I would expect nothing less, Dumbledore said. We'll talk, Arthur said. But not today. Today is his. Poseidon, who had been watching this exchange with the contained patience of someone who has observed 10,000 diplomatic conversations and found most of them tedious but occasionally instructive, said, the Horcruxes. Dumbledore looked at him. You will share your information on the Horcruxes with Harry completely, Poseidon said. Not a request. Not a threat. A fact stated in the register of things that are true and that the listener would benefit from accepting as such. Everything you know. Everything you suspect. You will not manage what he receives or when he receives it. Another pause. This is not negotiable. No, Dumbledore said, after a moment. I don't expect it is. He looked at Harry. I'll have a comprehensive file ready before the summer is out. You can collect it when you return. Good, Harry said. The train whistle went. Students began moving and the platform organized itself toward departure and Harry picked up his trunk. It lifted easily, the residual water pressure in the ambient air responding to the habit of his hands, and stood with it and looked at Arthur and Poseidon. End of July, he said to them. I'll come back for August at least. July 10th, Arthur said. July 15th, Harry said. 12th, Arthur said. Deal, Harry said, because having fathers who negotiated was, it turned out, genuinely good practice. Poseidon looked at this exchange with an expression that had settled into something specific, something that Harry had seen building over 4 years and that had no clean name, the feeling of a thing that had been cold and vast and old discovering, incrementally, that something warm and small and particular had become necessary. Not just chosen. Not just claimed. Necessary, the way the ocean is necessary to weather, the way the deep is necessary to the surface. The summer curriculum, Poseidon said, to Harry specifically. You've planned one, Harry said. I have planned several, Poseidon said. You will choose. He held out a sealed scroll. Harry took it. He weighed it in his hand. It was heavy, more pages than he'd expected, and Poseidon's seal in deep blue wax on the end. He tucked it into his robes. What's in it? Harry asked. Options, Poseidon said. Storm work, advanced thalassomancy, some Olympian foundational theory I have been considering introducing. A pause. And one other thing. What? Poseidon looked at him. The storm-gray eyes, the white hair, the weight of something so old that it had stopped being impressed by most things, and in all of that, for Harry specifically, a quality of openness that Harry knew was rare and recognized as the thing that mattered most. There is a ceremony, Poseidon said. Olympian. For the formal acknowledgement of a child of divine lineage. It is significant. It requires your consent, which is why I put it as an option and not an instruction. He paused. It would make formal what is already true. Harry looked at him. An Atlantis, Arthur said, from beside Harry, with the quietness of someone who has discussed this with Poseidon, presumably at length, has its own formal acknowledgement. It's different, civic rather than divine. But it would mean you're formally a son of Atlantis. Not just a ward, not just a resident. A child of the city. He looked at Harry steadily. Also your choice. The train whistle went again, more insistent. Harry looked at Arthur. He looked at Poseidon. He looked at the scroll in his hands and the lake in the middle distance and the castle at the top of the headland, old stone catching morning light, his mother's world and his. He thought about the quarry. He thought about 30 feet of grey-green water and a hand closing around a cage door. He thought about a god sitting on a bedroom floor. He thought about Mara in the training chamber saying the first thing you need to learn is how to be hit and not lose yourself. He thought about the North Atlantic in February and a storm that moved when he told it to. He thought about the mirror room and what he'd seen in the 3 seconds he'd looked, his parents, and the expression on their faces that was not grief and was not longing but was recognition. Yes, he said. To both. Arthur's hand landed on his shoulder and stayed there. Poseidon said nothing because 3 words from Poseidon contained 40, and the 3 words he'd said this morning were still landing. Harry. Ron called from the train door. If you miss the train, I am not waiting for you at King's Cross. He would absolutely wait for you at King's Cross, Hermione said, from behind Ron. I would, Ron confirmed immediately. Harry laughed, the genuine, unguarded kind that had bounced off quarry walls 4 years ago and had been finding new places to land ever since, and picked up his trunk and turned toward the train. He stopped and looked back once. Arthur was watching him with the expression from the quarry, the one that had never really gone away and that Harry had carried with him through every training session and every night in the hospital wing and every moment of the last year when the distance was abstract and he was still held by it. Poseidon was looking at the lake. But his head was tilted slightly toward Harry, which was Poseidon's version of watching. See you in, Harry did the calculation. 37 days. 36, Arthur said. I negotiated 15. I accepted 15, Arthur said, knowing I'd talk you down. Harry grinned and got on the train. He found his compartment, Ron already installed, Hermione already reading, Neville having been invited with the naturalness of someone who belongs somewhere and is being told so clearly for the first time, and sat down as the train began to move. He put the scroll from Poseidon on the seat beside him and looked out the window. Arthur and Poseidon were still on the platform. Poseidon was looking at the lake. Arthur was watching the train, one hand raised slightly as it moved. Harry put his palm against the window glass. The train rounded the first curve and the platform disappeared, and Scotland opened up outside in its summer green, the hills and the lochs and the particular quality of northern light that was so different from the deep ocean bioluminescence that Harry loved both things entirely and separately. So, Ron said, from across the compartment, with the tone of someone who has been containing a large quantity of questions out of respect for significant moments and has now determined the significant moment has passed. Atlantis. Atlantis, Harry confirmed. 2 miles underwater. Give or take. And we're actually going. If your mum says yes. Ron's expression became briefly mathematical. She's going to say yes in about 9 seconds once I explain what it is. And your dad? Hermione asked. Dad is going to want to know everything about the technology, Ron said. He's been fascinated with Muggle, with surface technology, things that aren't magic, for years. Atlantean tech is going to do something to him. He paused. In a good way. Probably. Neville had been listening with the careful attention of someone who wants to understand and is choosing the right moment to enter. What's it like, he asked Harry. Actually like, to live there. Harry thought about it honestly. Loud, he said. But the right kind of loud. The ocean has sound everywhere all the time and you stop noticing it and then you start noticing everything inside it. He looked at the window. Very big. You feel very small at first and then you feel like the size doesn't matter because you're part of something that's the biggest thing there is. He paused. The food is strange. Some of it glows. Don't eat the blue things for at least a month. Why? Neville asked. Philosophical reasons, Harry said. Ron looked like he was going to ask what that meant and then looked at Harry's expression and decided to ask later. Hermione had set down her book, completely, deliberately, and was looking at Harry with the expression that meant she was doing the thing she did, the synthesis thing, pulling threads from different parts of what she knew and weaving them into something. "Harry," she said. "Yes." "The ceremony Poseidon mentioned. The Olympian acknowledgement." "Yes. That would make you, formally. With divine lineage formally recognized." "Yes." "What does that mean? Practically. What changes?" Harry looked at the scroll on the seat beside him. The deep blue wax seal. The weight of it. "It formalizes what's already there," he said. "I don't think power changes significantly. It doesn't work like that, like a switch. It's more like, the difference between knowing something and having it acknowledged." He picked the scroll up, turned it over. "It matters symbolically. And in the Olympian world, symbolic and actual are the same thing. And the Atlantean one? The civic acknowledgement? That's more straightforward. It means I'm formally part of Atlantis. Heir, in some sense, not to the throne, Arthur has his own lineage for that, but to the city. To the tradition." He paused. "It means when I walk into the Atlantic, every Atlantean ward recognizes me as belonging there." Hermione looked at him for a long moment. "You already belong there," she said. "Yes," Harry agreed. "But it'll be nice to have the paperwork." Ron snorted. Neville smiled the small private smile of someone who has found something better than he was looking for when he boarded the train. Outside, the Scottish countryside moved past and the sun was working through the cloud cover in the particular determined way of northern sunlight in June, finding angles and landing in long stripes across hills and water. Harry sat with the scroll in his hands and the focused disc warm against his chest and the future 37 days ahead, 36, Arthur had negotiated him down before he got on the train, which was honestly impressive, and thought about the summer. Storm work. Advanced thalassomancy. A ceremony that would make formal what was already true. 37 days of Atlantic and Poseidon summer curriculum and Mara's opinions on his tactical choices from the last year, which were going to be extensive. And then September. Back to Hogwarts. The Horcruxes. The war that was not yet a war but was building toward one, the way weather builds, the way storms build, pressure accumulating until the conditions are right. He thought about Voldemort, dispersed and reforming somewhere. Voldemort, who had looked at him in the mirror room with a thing in his voice that was very close to genuine uncertainty, possibly the first genuine uncertainty he'd felt in decades, and who was, even now, probably recalibrating, revising, building something new out of the failure of the old plan. Harry thought, good. Build something new. I'll read it the same way I read everything. Find the structure. Find where the energy is committed. Find where it can be redirected. The ocean doesn't fight the storm. The ocean becomes the environment in which the storm either learns to move or burns itself out. He opened the scroll. Poseidon's handwriting was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd had several millennia to develop a hand, precise, slightly archaic, with certain letters that carried the particular weight of things written in stone before paper existed. The summer curriculum was comprehensive and genuinely exciting, the kind of reading that made Harry's training instinct sit up and pay attention. At the bottom, after the listed options, a single line in a slightly different ink, added later, or added separately, in the way of something that was decided after the main document, there is no more complete heir in the living world. Come home soon. Harry read it twice. Then he folded the scroll and held it in his hands and looked out the window at England going past, greening in the June light, unremarkable and specific in the way that things are yours when you've chosen them rather than been assigned them. Ron was describing Atlantis to Neville with the authority of someone who had seen it from the platform from a distance and felt this was sufficient foundation for a detailed explanation. Hermione was listening to Ron's description with the expression of someone who will correct it when he's done. Neville was listening to both of them with the expression of someone who has decided that wherever Harry Potter goes, things happen that are worth hearing about. The train moved south through Scotland toward England, and Harry sat in a compartment with his 3 friends and his father's letter in his chest and his father's scroll in his hands, and the Atlantic 300 miles west pulling on something in his blood the way the moon pulls tides. He was 11 years old, and he had 2 fathers and a city and a sea and a war ahead and a world on each side of the water, and the storm in him had been there since before he could name it. He was not afraid of any of it. He pressed his free hand flat against the window glass, palm cool against the pane, and felt, far below, through the water table, through the rivers and the chalk aquifers and the deep geological seams, the Atlantic. Still there. Still listening. Still his.